I felt something near me for as long as I can remember. Even as a young child, around the age of 5 or even younger, I recall never wanting to go to sleep. There was always this unnerving feeling that something was near my pillow, watching me, though I couldn't see it. These feelings stayed with me through my childhood, but the first time I had an actual paranormal experience was when I was around 8 years old, living in our old house in Glendale, California. I remember that night vividly. I was lying in bed on my stomach, facing to the right, fully awake and alert. Suddenly, I felt a distinct tap on my left shoulder. Startled, I quickly turned around, but there was no one there. However, I heard loud footsteps running away, followed by the sound of a door slamming shut. I knew it wasn't my parents. They were sound asleep on the other side of the house. From that night onward, strange things continued to happen. I've lost count of how many times I've woken up in the middle of the night, completely paralyzed, unable to move, speak, or even scream. It felt like someone or something was pushing me down. On one occasion, I felt this presence squeezing my head so hard that I had a headache for the entire day afterward. This presence, which I refer to as him, has taken many forms over the years. Sometimes he would embrace me, cuddle with me, or even kiss me. Other times it felt more sinister, as though he was taking advantage of me. I've yelled at him, begged him to leave, even prayed to God to take him away, but nothing worked. He kept coming back. When I was 19, we moved to a new house, but he followed me there too. One night, while I was wide awake, I saw him clearly for the first time. His face was obscured, but I could see his silhouette. He appeared to be a large, muscular man, almost like an Egyptian warrior, holding a dagger. He walked toward me, but I managed to gather the courage to ask him to leave, and to my surprise, he did. But even though he left that night, he didn't stop coming. He continued to hold me down in my sleep and sometimes took advantage of me. When I was 21, something even stranger happened. I was awake in the middle of the night when I suddenly felt myself being lifted off the bed. I was taken out of my room, across the hallway, and into the guest room before being brought back to my bed. I wasn't asleep. I was fully conscious the entire time. The next morning, my sister mentioned that she had heard me walking around the house during the night, though I hadn't told her what had happened. I'm not a sleepwalker, and I knew I hadn't been walking on my own. A week after that incident, I decided to confront him the next time he appeared. When he returned, I asked him why he was bothering me. What happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. A white owl suddenly appeared in my room. Terrified, I asked the owl to leave, and it started to fly away. But then I thought, wait, unless you came to answer my question. At that moment, the owl returned, and as soon as it did, I passed out. In my sleep, I had a dream. I was lying on a tomb inside what looked like an ancient Egyptian palace. Standing over me was the ghost, looking down at me with sorrow in his eyes. I had apparently killed myself in this vision, and he was mourning. I woke up feeling shaken, but the ghost didn't stop haunting me after that. Last year, when I was 24, I was dating someone I really liked. One night, after we had been talking on the phone, I went to bed, only to wake up to the ghost pushing me down again. This time, he was more aggressive than ever, pushing me repeatedly. Then, I saw him grab one of my shoes. He was going to use it to stab me. I begged him to stop, and thankfully he did. Even after that incident, he continued to visit me regularly. 2 weeks ago, he appeared again. This time, I didn't resist. I let him have his way with me because I was too tired to fight. I even pretended to like it. Afterward, I asked him kindly to show me his face, as I had never fully seen it before. Slowly, his face began to form into that of a good-looking man. After that, I fell asleep, and he appeared in my dream. In the dream, I opened a door, and both the ghost and the guy I had been dating were standing there. I ran to my friend and hugged him, ignoring the ghost. The ghost saw this, lowered his head, and walked away. A few days ago, he came back again. This time, he didn't do anything. He just sat on my bed, watching me. At school, we were having a band concert one night in the cafeteria, and I was part of the video crew, tasked with taping the performance. It was around 7 p.m. when my teacher told me I could take a break and get some fresh air. I stepped outside with my friend Jazzy, and we sat on the grass, chatting for a bit. After about 5 minutes, Jazzy's walkie-talkie went off, and without saying much, she jumped up and ran back inside. I thought it was odd since I usually had the bigger job, and my teacher hadn't called me back in yet. But I didn't mind. I sat outside alone, enjoying the cool night air. As I sat there, I glanced toward the playground near me. That's when I saw her, a little girl walking toward me. She was pretty, with her hair tied in a cute ponytail, wearing a skirt and a blue-collared shirt. She looked like any normal kid, except there was something off about her. As she got closer, I noticed her eyes were wet, and her face looked almost expressionless, like stone. There was such sadness in her features that it tugged at my heart, making me curious about what was wrong. The girl walked past me and stopped right in front of the boys' bathroom. She stood there, facing the door, completely still. I started to wonder if she was lost or if maybe she had misplaced her parents in the dark. Maybe she just needed to go to the bathroom? I wasn't sure. It had been a minute, and she hadn't moved an inch, still staring at the door. Feeling like something wasn't right, I got up and walked over to her. I asked if she was okay or if she needed help finding the girls' bathroom. She didn't respond, just looked up at me with a painful, tearful expression. It was unnerving, but I tried again, stepping toward the girls' bathroom and telling her she could use it if she needed. After what felt like an eternity, she finally walked over and entered the bathroom. I went back to sitting on the grass, waiting for a signal to go back inside. Time passed, and I started wondering if they'd forgotten about me. Just then, I heard footsteps approaching from a distance. I turned to look, and it was her, the same girl. My heart skipped a beat. How could she have come out of the bathroom without me seeing? I was sitting right there, and I never saw her leave. She walked right back to the boys' bathroom and stood in front of the door, just like before. Fear crept up my spine. What was she doing? Thankfully, at that exact moment, my walkie-talkie went off, and I rushed inside to the stage room. My teacher assigned me to the camera at the front of the stage, so I took my position and began filming the concert. As I panned across the students, something stopped me cold. I froze, staring at the camera screen, unable to believe my eyes. There she was, the girl who had just been standing outside by the boys' bathroom, now sitting on stage, playing the flute. She was wearing a long-sleeve white shirt and black pants, completely different from the skirt and blue-collared shirt she had been wearing moments ago. My heart pounded. Was this even real? How was she here, playing in the band, when I had just seen her outside? Something was terribly wrong. She wasn't supposed to be here. Sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, confused. I suppose most people do that at one point or another. But there are times when I shoot up in a panic, having dreamt something tragic. A murder, a rape, an assault. You might be wondering, what does that have to do with anything? The truth is, I don't know. I wake with the eerie feeling that I'm being shown a true story from beyond, even though I have no proof. It's like someone is showing me these images for a reason. But what is that reason? Am I supposed to help? I try, but I never seem to succeed. Every day I see ghosts. That might sound strange to you, but for me, it's just my life. I'm a psychic medium, and this is my reality. Just the other night, I was being held in my sleep, but the dream I had was so terrifying that it left a bad taste in my mouth all day. In the dream, I was a blonde woman, pretty, but fighting for my life. Every move I or she made was an attempt to survive. A man had captured her, and though he could have forced himself on her, she gave in willingly, perhaps thinking it would save her. At one point, she asked him if he had to kill her. The man was ugly, with long, stringy gray hair, a bulbous nose, and a weathered face. He replied that he had to and that he was sorry. Next, I watched in horror as the woman, who had tried so hard to survive, was smothered with a pillow. Her cold, steel-gray eyes stared straight ahead, then shifted slightly to the right before freezing in place. She was dead. Her wavy blonde hair framed her lifeless face, and the man, calm, almost tranquil, looked on as he finished what he had started. He took her body to a remote, abandoned house in the middle of the night and discarded her without care, leaving her to rot in the cold darkness. I woke up traumatized. When I have dreams like this, I feel the victim's pain and fear. The images stay with me, vivid and haunting, sometimes for days or weeks. At first, the fear is overwhelming, but eventually, I accept it and the intensity fades. But some visions linger. For example, every day, I have the same image replaying in my mind. A woman in a powder pink sweater argues with a man, possibly her husband, in the kitchen at night. She's in her 30s, attractive, with her hair in a ponytail. The man is about the same age, well-dressed and handsome. They argue loudly, and then, without warning, she stabs him in the heart. He falls to the ground and she stabs him again, for more times. She's crying as she wipes her brow with her bloodied hand, standing over her husband's lifeless body. I see this image over and over again. I believe these visions are someone's attempt to seek justice from beyond the grave. They make sense to me in a way. How about you? For some, being a medium is a gift. For others, it's all fiction, something made up by the mind. But for me, it's a fact. The dreams, the feelings, the ghosts, they're all real. They're here for a reason, whether it's to seek justice, find closure, or let go of something they can't move past. I often wake up hearing them tell me their names, where they're buried, what happened to them. They urge me to write it all down, but I don't. I'm angry that they've shown me such horror, but part of me wonders if writing it down could bring justice to a forgotten soul. Instead of letting my frustration take over, maybe I should try to listen more carefully, so I can get to the bottom of these dreams, feelings, and visions. All I can do is try. And what about the ghosts themselves? Well, sometimes when a person dies, they don't cross over into the light. I know some people think the light is just a myth, but I believe it exists. I've been helping ghosts cross over for 5 years now. Some choose not to go into the light, while others have unfinished business that keeps them earthbound. Many ghosts stay stuck here because of fear, trauma, or a lack of understanding. Some are mentally ill or believe they will be punished on the other side for what they've done. Maybe they killed someone or even themselves. To them, staying earthbound seems safer than facing the unknown. In my experience, ghosts behave much like they did in life. Their personalities, fears, anxieties, they stay the same. Some find peace and move on, while others remain stuck, earthbound for decades or even centuries. Their sudden, traumatic deaths often leave them trapped, unable to move on, sometimes not even aware that they're dead. Right now, I have 2 ghosts who have attached themselves to me, though neither of them knows why. Both are mentally ill stalkers in a way. They can't see the light no matter how much I try to help them. One of them is a woman who cries constantly, consumed by anxiety attacks. The other is a prankster and a pervert, living in constant fear of being punished on the other side. Both are pathological liars, haunted by their own deeds far more than they haunt me. I've tried for years to help them, but I've reached a point where I've given up. No one can help them but themselves. Whatever unfinished business or fear they're holding onto is theirs to resolve. What do you think? Whatever your thoughts, just know this, we are definitely not alone. It's been a while since I've submitted any stories, but for good reason. I haven't been bothered by anything paranormal lately. However, I do have a few stories to share, which happened to a friend of mine in a place called Crystal Court. I won't disclose the exact location, but it's a fairly large mall. My friend, who I'll call Pedro, simply because I like that name, worked as a security guard on the graveyard shift. One night, while Pedro was working late, he decided to use the restroom. Keep in mind, there are only a handful of staff members on duty during the night shift, so no one else could be responsible for what I'm about to tell you. Pedro was on the 2nd level walking to the restroom, and after entering, he started doing his business. That's when he heard a noise. At first, he couldn't quite figure out what it was, so he closed his eyes and focused, listening more intently. The noise grew louder. He quickly looked around, but no one else was there. Then, as he listened more carefully, he realized it was the sound of someone whistling. It was faint, like a small child lazily walking around and whistling a tune. The sound grew even closer, right outside the bathroom stall door. Startled, Pedro flung the door open, but there was no one there. Another story comes from a different security officer involving a customer. This customer was in the same second-level restroom when she heard what sounded like a little girl throwing paper towels and toilet paper all over the place. Thinking it was odd and disrespectful, she called security. The officer arrived, knocked on the door, and asked if anyone was inside, but there was no response. Yet he could still hear the commotion inside. Figuring he needed to intervene, the officer opened the door, only to find paper towels and toilet paper flying around the room. But there was no one there. With only one way in and out, there was no logical explanation for what he had witnessed. Then, there's the story about the carousel in the center of the mall. The only way to turn it on is by using a key to flip the switch to the on position, and then pressing a button. One night, while Pedro was on duty, he was up on the 3rd floor when he heard the familiar sound of the carousel starting up. Along with the whirring of the ride, he also heard the unmistakable sound of a little girl laughing and giggling. Panicked, he called for backup and raced down to the 1st floor, where the carousel was located. When he arrived, the carousel was indeed on, but no one was near it. The controls had somehow been turned to the on position, but the area was completely deserted. Another incident involved a new security guard, who was only on his 2nd day of work. He was starting to get the hang of the rounds required for the job. During a break, he got into his truck and started driving down the parking structure. As he casually glanced in his rearview mirror, it felt as if he had run someone over. It was the middle of the night, but late-night wanderers sometimes passed through the mall, so it wasn't entirely out of the ordinary. Shaken, he jumped out of his truck, looked around, and called for backup. There was nothing there, no body, no person, nothing. He got back into his truck, put the car in drive, and checked the rearview mirror again. This time, about 50 feet behind him, stood a little girl. He radioed his partner, urgently telling them to hurry because he had found a lost child. He looked forward for a moment, but when he glanced at the rearview mirror again, the girl was no longer standing behind the truck. She was sitting in the back seat. Terrified, he jumped out of the truck, walked straight to loss prevention, dropped off his equipment, and said, "I quit." As for the background of Crystal Court, there's a story that's been passed down through word of mouth. Before the mall was built, the area was all farmland, with small communities growing beans, avocados, and other crops. The land was once owned by a family of 3, a mother, father, and their young daughter. One day, while the little girl was playing on a tractor in the field, she slipped and fell off. In the process, she accidentally turned the tractor on, and it ran her over, killing her instantly. Here's the eerie part. The girl's name was Crystal, and the mall is named Crystal Court. Coincidence? Or is there something more to the story? I have always experienced the presence of the dead, for as long as I can remember. There are certain moments in my life that stand out more vividly than others, moments I can never forget. The first happened when I was 13 years old. My dad was stationed in Vietnam, and my family was living in El Paso, Texas. One night, I woke to the sounds of a loud party coming from the living room. Laughter, talking, glasses clinking, silverware being dropped. It was all so real. I got out of bed and saw my mother standing in her bedroom doorway across from mine, looking absolutely terrified. She asked me if I could hear it too. I nodded and walked down the dark hallway toward the source of the noise, feeling a bit brave despite the growing sense of dread. My mom stayed frozen in her doorway, too scared to move. As I reached the living room and flipped on the light switch, everything went silent. The room was empty, nothing was out of place, and the party sounds had vanished. At age 19, I had another experience while staying with my widowed grandmother in rural Alabama. She put me up in my late grandfather's room, the same room where he had slept before he passed. It was a quiet summer night, the only sound coming from the crickets chirping outside. As I lay in bed, feeling content about being there with my grandmother, something strange happened. The crickets abruptly stopped. There was complete silence, and then I saw it. A large, glowing yellow orb floating around the foot of the bed. It moved slowly toward the head of the bed. Strangely, I wasn't scared. I immediately thought of my grandfather, as if he had come to check on who was sleeping in his bed. I felt comforted by his presence, like he didn't mind that I was there. After a few moments, the orb vanished, and the crickets resumed their song. I drifted back to sleep, feeling oddly peaceful. Years later, after I was married and living in California, we experienced another kind of miracle. My husband and I had 2 healthy boys, ages 10 and 6, but for 5 years, we struggled to have a third child. My husband eventually declared he didn't want any more children, that it just wasn't meant to be. But I felt differently. I was convinced there was a child waiting to join our family, still in heaven, meant to be with us. One night, after a heated argument with my husband about it, I left to sleep on the sofa in the family room. I wasn't asleep. I was lying there, crying softly. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a gentle voice, a young man's voice, speak from the middle of the room, just a few feet away. "Don't cry, you will have another child," it said. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. The message filled me with comfort, and I felt so safe that I rolled over, turning my back to where the voice had come from. Within 2 months, I was pregnant with my 3rd son, Michael, who has been a blessing to our family for almost 15 years now. When Michael was about a year old, we took a Christmas photo of him in my arms. We were in a bedroom on the other side of the house, far from the Christmas tree and decorations. Every other photo looked normal, but in this one picture, there were sparkling Christmas colors all over our faces, as if someone had covered us in twinkle lights. It was beautiful, yet completely unexplainable. There was another time when my husband, in a moment of frustration, punished our older sons by sending them to their rooms without TV for not completing a chore. The next day, my husband, who had been alone in the family room, said he heard a young man's voice behind him, saying in a firm, scolding tone, "Stop the anger. Be kind to your sons." It left him shaken. I've also had physical sensations that I believe were caused by the spirits in our house. One night, I was sitting on the floor, watching TV, when I felt a strange electrical charge move from one side of my body to the other. There was a breeze that followed it like something or someone had passed right through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was one of the unseen presences in our home. Since we moved into the house, my husband and sons always joked about the name Larry. They found it funny for some reason, even calling our pet bird Larry. But after almost 8 years in the house, I found out from a neighbor that a college student had once lived there. He had passed away not long after graduating, though not at the house. His name? Larry. It all started when I was about 9 years old. I was half asleep one night when a small noise woke me up. I sat up in bed, feeling curious but not afraid. I heard the sound again and turned my head toward the wall, where it seemed to be coming from. That's when I noticed something. A dark figure in the corner of the room. It was a little girl quietly sobbing. At first, I wasn't scared because I thought it was my younger sister. But then I realized my sister was sound asleep right next to me. That's when fear set in. I didn't know what to do, and the last thing I wanted was to get out of bed. So I turned around, pulled the blanket over my head, and eventually fell asleep. But about an hour later, I woke up again, this time to the sound of that same sobbing. My next ghostly experience happened a few years later in the bathroom. I had been washing my feet after walking barefoot outside. I was sitting on a stool near the bathtub, soaping up my feet, when I got this strange feeling, like I was being watched. It was the kind of creepy sensation that sends shivers down your spine. I looked around the bathroom but saw nothing, until I glanced toward the small window in the corner of the room. What I saw made my heart race. There, in the window, was an eye. Not just an eye, but half of a face. It was dark, but I could clearly make out the eye staring back at me. Panic set in, and I ran out of the bathroom, nearly slipping because my feet were still soapy. I ran straight to my mom and told her what I had seen, but she didn't believe me. She thought it was just my imagination. The next day, the same thing happened. This time, I was using the bathroom when I got that same eerie feeling. I didn't want to look at the window, but curiosity got the best of me. I turned toward it, and there it was again, the eye staring back at me. I bolted out of the bathroom, but my dad stopped me, puzzled. "Why are you running out of the bathroom?" he asked. I told him, "There's someone staring at me through the window." It's happened twice now. Concerned, my dad grabbed a flashlight and went outside to investigate. I followed him, still shaking. He searched the small space behind the house, where the bathroom window leads, but found nothing. Not even footprints. That's when I realized it wasn't a person. It was a ghost. Years passed, and we moved to different houses until we found a place that felt like home. But about a month after we settled in, strange things started happening. Small items would go missing, and I'd hear odd noises in the kitchen. At first, only I noticed these things, until my mom experienced something for herself. One day, we were all in the living room, us kids watching TV while my mom was sweeping. When she finished, she went to the restroom. As she opened the door, it suddenly slammed shut by itself. Confused, my mom turned to us, thinking one of us was playing a prank. But we were all sitting on the couch, staring back at her. She slowly walked over and told us what had just happened. A few months later, we were on our way to my grandmother's house for a big family dinner. Before we left, we made sure to turn everything off since we'd be gone for several hours. When we returned home, we heard a strange whirring sound coming from the kitchen. My dad went in to investigate and we followed, scared. He turned on the light and saw that the blender was on, whirring away by itself. My dad checked the blender's temperature, expecting it to be warm, but it was ice cold, as if it had just turned on. None of us could explain it. On March 6th, my mom and I took an emergency trip to Mexico because my grandmother had fallen seriously ill. Sadly, she passed away in her sleep while we were there. We stayed in my mom's old room from her childhood. Around 2 a.m., I was awakened by a scratching sound at the window. I was scared, but I forced myself to go back to sleep. The next day, my mom told me she had heard the same noises. The following night, it happened again, only worse. I woke up to the familiar scratching, but this time, I heard noises in the room. "Diana, are you awake?" my mom asked. "Yeah," I replied. "Did you hear those noises?" she asked. "Yes, I did, but maybe it's just mice." My mom shook her head. "There are no mice here." We didn't want to think about what else it could be. After that night, the noises stopped. After my grandmother's passing, we knew she would visit us. One day, while my mom was napping, she felt cold and was only half asleep because of it. Suddenly, she felt the blanket being gently pulled up to cover her more. When she woke, she asked who had been in the room, but no one had entered. A month later, I returned to California while my mom stayed in Mexico. The night I arrived, I stayed at my aunt's house. I didn't experience much there, except that whenever I entered her room, I felt uneasy, like I needed to get out quickly. Every time I left, the door would slam shut on its own. When my mom finally returned, we moved into a small home. It was fine at first, but soon I started noticing strange things again. Footsteps in the kitchen late at night, or 2 fingers brushing against my back while I lay in bed. I told my mom, but she didn't believe me. Not until one day when she was cooking and saw a dark figure dash into my room. She thought it was my little brother, but he was still in the shower. Strange things continue to happen, but I've learned to live with them. I've accepted that something not of this world is following me. To me, it's more of a gift than a curse. My story takes place about 8 years ago. It was a cool evening, and summer was slowly giving way to fall. My parents and I were feeling restless, not in the mood for television. So my mom suggested we go for a drive through the Castro Valley hills and mountains. She knew how much I loved ghost stories and anything paranormal. And there was one particular tale she had heard her whole life, about a woman known as the White Witch. Now, I know there are many stories with the same name, but this one always fascinated me. However, the White Witch has little to do with what happened to us that night. Our real encounter occurred after my mom had finished telling her ghost story. We were driving along the winding 2-lane highway, with the car windows cracked to let in the cool evening air. The fragrance from the trees filled the night, and the atmosphere was calm and serene. As we climbed higher up the mountain, we noticed a man and 2 young girls standing beside a broken-down car on the roadside. It was clear that their car had been packed to the brim, like they had all their worldly possessions with them. My mom's heart immediately went out to them. My dad pulled over to the opposite side of the road and parked behind their car in the gravel. The man and his daughters were standing behind the car, looking stranded and worried. My dad asked if they needed any help, and the man replied, "Yes, please. My car ran out of gas, and I don't want to leave my daughters alone out here." Moved by their situation, my parents offered to drive down the hill to get them some gas. The man was incredibly grateful and handed my dad a $5 bill for the gas. My dad assured him we'd be back in just a few minutes. As we pulled away, the car's headlights briefly illuminated the man and his daughters. I remember thinking there was something surreal about the scene, almost as if they weren't entirely real, but I brushed it off as just my imagination. We descended the hill and quickly reached the gas station at the bottom. It was a small, quiet place, and we were the only ones there. We filled up a small plastic jug with gas, and I bought 2 candy bars for the little girls, thinking it might cheer them up. Then we headed back up the mountain, the whole trip taking less than 5 minutes. When we arrived at the spot where they had been, we were shocked to find that they were gone. The car, the man, the 2 girls, everything had disappeared. We couldn't believe it. Not only were they gone, but the gravel where their car had been was completely smooth, with no tire tracks. No sign that anyone had been there at all. We were all a bit freaked out at this point. There was no way they could have gotten past us. The gas station was right at the bottom of the hill, and we would have seen them if they had coasted down the road. My dad, trying to make sense of it, drove a little farther up the hill, thinking they might have somehow gotten the car started and driven off. But there was no sign of them anywhere. We drove back down the hill, searching for any trace of the car or the 3 strangers, but there was nothing. The gravel remained smooth, untouched, as though none of us had ever been there. The realization crept over us. We had just experienced something beyond explanation. There we were, holding a jug of gasoline and 2 candy bars, with no one to give them to. We kept replaying the scene in our minds, trying to decipher what had just happened. How could they have disappeared without a trace? How could there be no tire marks or any sign of movement in the gravel? After going up the hill one more time and finding nothing but a dead end, we all reached the same conclusion. We had just encountered something ghostly. There had been something off about the strangers and their situation, something that didn't feel entirely normal. Even now, when I think back on it, chills run up my spine. It was as though the man and his daughters had never existed, as if they were echoes from another time, briefly crossing our path before fading away. This story happened about 8 years ago when I first moved to the United States from the Philippines. I had just turned 13, and though I didn't want to leave, I had no choice. When we arrived in the US, my family stayed in a hotel for the first week. The hotel had a reputation for being haunted, but my mom thought it would be a good idea for us to spend some family bonding time there. I wasn't too thrilled about it. I was more the type to hang out with friends than spend time with family. On the second day of our stay, my mom suggested we go explore the town. Everyone else was up for it, but I wasn't. I knew if I told her I didn't want to come, she would make me go anyway, so I came up with an excuse. I told her I wasn't feeling well and that I'd rather stay behind and rest. She believed me, though she was hesitant to leave me alone. After reassuring her that I'd be fine, she and the rest of the family left. I was excited to have the whole hotel room to myself. I didn't feel guilty about lying. I just wanted some peace and quiet. I grabbed the TV remote and started flipping through the channels, but like most hotels, nothing on TV was interesting. Frustrated, I tossed the remote aside without turning the TV off and walked over to my luggage to grab my PSP. To my disappointment, the batteries were dead, and the charger was in the car. Sighing, I turned back toward the television, but to my surprise, it was off. I didn't remember turning it off, nor did I hear it go off. I felt a little uneasy but brushed it off, figuring it wasn't worth dwelling on. With nothing else to do, I picked up a magazine and started flipping through it. As I turned the pages, I noticed 2 words had been cut out from one of the articles. I thought maybe some kid had gotten to it, but I didn't give it much thought. While I was reading, the sudden sound of glass shattering echoed from the bathroom. Startled, I went to investigate, expecting to see something broken, but everything was perfectly in place. No glass, no mess. It was unsettling, But before I could make sense of it, loud music blared from the TV, making me jump. The TV was back on, this time tuned to MTV. I grabbed the remote to turn it off, but nothing happened when I pressed the power button. I checked the batteries, still in place. Frustrated, I threw the remote on the bed and walked over to the TV to unplug it. Only then did it turn off. My heart was racing. I needed to calm down, so I decided to head to the lobby for a while. I stayed there for what felt like hours before finally going back to the room. As I approached the door, I heard music again. Thinking my parents had returned, I eagerly opened the door, but what I saw stopped me in my tracks. A little boy was standing by the television, which was on again. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell he was a child. I assumed it was my younger brother, so I walked toward him. But before I could reach him, he vanished. My heart pounded, but I didn't scream. By then, I was already somewhat used to spirits. I was still shaken, but not as terrified as I might have been before. I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face and noticed something strange on the mirror. 2 words spelled out in cut-out letters, "Help me." They looked like they had been taken from a magazine. Remembering the magazine I had been reading earlier, I grabbed it and flipped to the page where the words had been missing. Sure enough, the cut-out words matched perfectly. Determined to figure out what was going on, I returned to the room and called out to the boy, asking him what his name was and what he needed help with. Instead of answering, the TV switched on again. I tried asking more questions, but the only response I got was the TV turning on and off or switching channels. I eventually gave up, too tired to continue, and fell asleep. I was later woken by a light touch on my leg. Assuming it was the little boy again, I sat up, but instead, it was my mom trying to wake me. It was late afternoon, and we were about to head out for dinner. I didn't tell anyone about what had happened and tried to put it out of my mind. During dinner, my little brother tugged on my shirt. When I asked what he wanted, he looked at me and asked, "Who was with you when you were sleeping?" Confused, I asked what he meant, and he told me there had been a boy sitting on the bed, staring at me when he walked into the room. His words sent chills down my spine, but I brushed it off, telling him he must have imagined it. Throughout the rest of our stay, I experienced smaller encounters, like the feeling of someone touching my hand or hair, and the TV acting strangely when I was alone. But I wasn't afraid. The boy didn't seem to want to harm me, and in a strange way, I found comfort in his presence. The last thing that happened was on the day we were leaving the hotel. As we packed up and got ready to go, I felt a light tug on my shirt, as if the boy didn't want me to leave. In that moment, I felt a bit emotional, like I was leaving behind someone I had come to care for. I spread my arms, inviting him for a hug, and felt a cool breeze wrap around my waist. It felt like I was saying goodbye to a younger brother I never had. It even made me tear up a little. I said goodbye and stepped outside the room. As my dad drove us away from the hotel, I glanced back at the building one last time. In the window of our room, I saw a small figure waving. It was the boy saying goodbye. I'm not entirely sure if what I've experienced falls under the category of sleep paralysis or something else, but it doesn't quite match the descriptions I've read about. Nor did these incidents happen as I was waking up or falling asleep. They occurred while I was already lying in bed, wide awake. But I guess I should just explain what happened. The first time something strange occurred, I was 12 years old. It was well past midnight, and I was lying awake. I've always struggled with insomnia, so being up that late didn't bother me. But for some reason, I felt an overwhelming sense of fear that night. An inexplicable, creeping dread that had been building ever since I'd gotten into bed. I tried to calm myself down by reading, telling myself over and over that there was nothing to be afraid of. There was no logical reason to feel so scared. But despite my best efforts, it was as if another voice was countering everything I told myself. It was a creeping, insistent voice, like something was warning me that I wasn't safe, no matter how much I reasoned otherwise. By around 2:30 a.m., the fear intensified to the point where I could barely stand it. I felt like if I left any part of my body exposed, outside the safety of my blankets, something terrible would happen, like I'd be dragged away to some horrific fate. So, I did what any terrified kid would do. I dove under the covers. Then, things got stranger. That voice, the one I had thought was just in my head, became audible. It grew louder and louder, almost like someone was screaming. I couldn't tell if it was male or female. It was just a horrible, shrieking sound, like someone screaming in terror. At the same time, it sounded like a powerful wind was blowing directly over me, so strong that I could feel it, and I couldn't even open my eyes against it. Came from somewhere just above my head, and the sound was all I could hear. On top of that, I felt this terrifying sensation of being pulled downward, as if a vortex had formed around my stomach and was sucking me into it. I could hardly breathe. I was hyperventilating, and at that moment, the fear was entirely my own. It wasn't just that voice or the wind anymore. It felt like I was going to be swallowed by whatever this was. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The screaming, the wind, the feeling of being pulled away, it all vanished. I kept my eyes tightly shut, too scared to move, and somehow I managed to fall asleep. I'm 17 now, and these experiences have continued to happen on and off over the years, though with slight variations. Once, I heard voices after the wind had stopped. One of the voices sounded like my own, and another unfamiliar voice laughed and said how funny it was that I reacted the way I did. I looked directly toward where the voices were coming from, right above my head, but there was nothing there. Another time, I managed to open my eyes against the wind. Everything in my room looked distorted, like the wind was blowing reality itself away. The room was blurred in the direction the wind was blowing, but oddly, nothing in the room was actually moving. Nothing was being blown around. But the worst time, the most terrifying moment, was when I opened my eyes and saw something I wish I hadn't. A figure in the wind. It looked like an extremely obese woman with long red hair, but she wasn't quite human. Her skin was covered in giant warts, and her eyes were an unsettling yellow. I couldn't tell if she was old or young, but the edges of her body flickered as if she were made of fire. She was the one screaming. That image has stuck with me ever since, and I've never tried to open my eyes again during one of these episodes. I still have no idea what any of this could be. Some have suggested that it might be a severe case of hypnagogia or perhaps an accidental astral projection gone wrong. But none of that really explains the intensity or the strange sensations I've experienced. All I know is that whatever it is, it's unlike anything I've ever read or heard about. This experience happened about 2 months ago, and it involved my then 16-month-old son. I've had a few paranormal experiences throughout my life, but this one is the most recent. To give you a little background, my grandmother, whom we called Mimi, passed away on September 27, 2005, just a month after Hurricane Katrina. She had been battling Alzheimer's for 8 years and, by that time, didn't recognize us or even know who she was anymore. She was living in a nursing home in New Orleans and had to be evacuated because of the hurricane. They believed the stress of the evacuation is what led to her passing. Her ashes remained at my parents' house for 3 years, as the cemeteries in New Orleans were unfit for burials after the hurricane. Finally, in November 2008, we were able to lay her ashes to rest. For some reason, I always found the idea of her ashes sitting in my parents' house a little unsettling. Before the Alzheimer's took hold, Mimi lived in a senior apartment building, where I would often stay with her. I loved visiting her. She always kept Kit Kats in the fridge because she said they tasted better cold. I particularly remember the unique smell of her apartment. It wasn't a bad smell, just a scent that was distinctly hers. Mimi also sold Avon for years. It was a huge part of her life after my grandfather passed away. Fast forward to April 2006. I got married and moved to Southern California with my husband, and in October 2007, my son was born. He never met my grandmother, of course, and I didn't have any pictures of her. Most of them were lost in the hurricane. I never talked about her around him, and I had never mentioned the word Mimi to my son, nor had anyone else. He was with me in November 2008 when we finally buried her ashes, but nothing out of the ordinary happened that day. Now, in March 2009, I was cleaning up in the living room while my son was down for a nap in his room with the door closed. I had just started selling Avon, so the room was filled with Avon boxes that I was sorting through. As I was working, a familiar smell suddenly hit me. One that was definitely not the scent of the apple cinnamon candles I had burning. It was the smell of Mimi, her apartment, her clothes, her scent. It was unmistakably hers. I looked around, half expecting to see something of hers lying around, but I had nothing of hers out in the open. The only things I had of hers were a hand mirror, which had been damaged by floodwater and no longer smelled like her, a ring, and a necklace, all of which were locked away. The smell disappeared as quickly as it had come, and I smiled, thinking maybe she was visiting. Just to be sure, I sniffed the Avon boxes, but they all smelled like cardboard. An hour or so later, my son woke up from his nap, and I went to get him. As I entered his room, I briefly smelled Mimi's scent again, but it vanished almost instantly. My son was standing in his crib, smiling and laughing. I placed him on the changing table to change his diaper, and out of nowhere, he pointed to the ceiling and said, "Mimi." I was stunned. I hadn't ever used that word around him, so I gently corrected him. "No, baby mama," I said, pointing to myself. He smiled and pointed at me, saying, "Mama." Then, he pointed to the corner of the room above his crib and said, "Mimi." Again. Not sure what to think, I asked him, "Did Mimi come to play with you?" He just clapped his hands and laughed. That night, I put my son to bed around 9 p.m., as usual. I turned on his musical turtle, his lava lamp, and then closed the door. He didn't always fall asleep right away, so I could usually hear him babbling or kicking the wall for a bit. But around 2 a.m., I heard him talking loudly, and I thought, why is he still awake? I got out of bed, about to check on him, when I heard him saying, "Mimi, Mimi," followed by bursts of laughter. For some reason, my cheeks started to burn, though I wasn't sure why. I opened the door, and Mimi's smell hit me so strongly that it almost knocked me back. It was like her presence had filled the entire room. My son was standing up in his crib, bouncing and laughing. I checked on him, and by the time I laid him back down, the smell had faded. I left the room, feeling too unsettled to sleep. I could still hear him saying, "Mimi," as I lay in bed, trying to read. At some point, I fell asleep and had a vivid dream about her. In the dream, Mimi and I were sitting in her living room, eating Kit Kats like we used to. She looked at me and said, "I'm glad you're finally happy." The dream felt so real, so comforting. The next day, and ever since then, I haven't smelled her scent or heard my son say "Mimi" again. I firmly believe that children can see things that we adults cannot or choose not to see. In my heart, I feel like Mimi came to meet her great-grandson and check up on me as well. It was her way of saying goodbye in her own special way. I drove through Hollywood, or as I like to call it, Hollyweird, navigating the crowded streets until I finally found a parking spot. If you've ever been around the Sunset Strip, you know how congested and strange it can get. The moment I stepped out of my car, I saw something unusual. A dwarf riding a pink Stingray bike, complete with a Viking helmet adorned with pink horns. It was quite the sight. The street was filled with people, including prostitutes roaming the boulevard, looking for customers. My heart ached for them, especially the ones who looked as young as my own daughter. The pain in their eyes was unmistakable. I couldn't help but think about how hard their lives must be, struggling with addiction, low self-esteem, or simply being discarded by society. They were always there, morning, noon, and night, just like the traffic. As I hurried past, nearly tripping over the long train of a transvestite's white wedding gown, I made my way into a nearby cafe. It was a relief to find a quiet corner table, away from the street noise. I ordered a black coffee and took a moment to observe the scene around me. The place was filled with Monday morning regulars, all slurping their coffee in a desperate attempt to wake up. But something else caught my attention, something darker. The junkies, so easy to spot, had a blackened aura around them, as if something sinister was draining what little life they had left. I could almost feel their time running out, and it made me sick to my core. The demonic entities attached to them were laughing, their joy a twisted form of success. I wanted to shut it out, to not see what was happening, but it was hard to ignore the hollow shells of souls being consumed by addiction. As I sat quietly, trying to keep to myself, my eyes followed the paranormal activity in the cafe. A ghostly elderly woman tugged at the hem of a young woman's skirt, desperately trying to get her attention. Of course, the young woman didn't notice. She was completely unaware of the spirit, who was likely a relative, maybe a parent or grandparent. At the coffee line, I saw a man in a plaid tie talking to a middle-aged businessman. A ghost hovered next to them, whispering in the ear of the man with the tie. The businessman looked annoyed, but I couldn't hear what was being said. It was a bizarre scene, but one I'd grown accustomed to. Then my attention was drawn to the far side of the cafe. Hidden behind an old partition, I could sense an entity lurking in the shadows. It didn't reveal itself, but I knew it was there, watching. Suddenly, a flash of purple caught my eye. A spirit sat on the floor next to a woman who was gathering papers she had dropped. The spirit wore a bright purple tutu, paired with a sleeveless leotard. He was a large, hairy man, an odd sight for sure, and his tutu was clearly custom-made. It jutted out in expensive tulle, vibrant and eye-catching. It was one of the strangest ghostly visitations I had ever seen, and I couldn't help but watch in fascination. As I refocused on my surroundings, a waitress came by to refill my cup. I smiled at her, but she didn't smile back, just going through the motions. I mumbled a quiet thank you and turned my attention to the vacant table next to mine, where a ghostly young woman sat. She looked like she was straight out of the 60s, with bright clothing, heavily ratted hair, and dark eyeliner. She sat perfectly still, her hands flat on the table, staring straight ahead. She glanced briefly at the doorway and then faded away. I suspected this was a residual haunting, an echo of the past. She hadn't noticed me or anyone else. I wondered who she had been waiting for. Was it a lover? I would never know. Just then, my appointment walked through the entrance and headed toward my table. As he sat down and we shook hands, I couldn't help but glance at the smiling ghost standing behind him. I smiled back. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about my past, especially because some strange things have started happening again. I've tried for years to block out these memories, but they still give me chills. When I was younger, I lived in a house with my mom, brother, and sister until I was 9. My stepdad stayed with us occasionally, but most of the time it was just us. I dreaded bedtime every night because of a figure that haunted me. A lady who would stand in my bedroom doorway with her hands outstretched. She was beautiful, with long red hair and a white gown. On her head, she wore a crown made of what looked like little brown sticks. I was terrified of her. Every night, I would sleep with my mom, hoping she would wake up and see the lady, but no matter how much I cried or yelled, my mom never stirred. Sometimes the woman would stand at the end of my bed, just watching me. In my fear, I'd run to my brother's room for comfort. He saw her too. So did my sister. We never understood why she was there or what she wanted, but she always came back. One afternoon, my 3 cousins were visiting, and we were all in the living room when we heard my sister screaming from her room. We rushed to her, and there she was, the lady walking toward my sister with her hands outstretched. We all started screaming. My brother yelled at her to leave, and in the chaos, she disappeared. My sister was left crying, shaking with fear. After that, my cousins never stayed over again. My sister's boyfriend, who was also there that day, refused to come to the house again. From then on, she had to meet him elsewhere. Even when our cousins visited, they would only stay on the front porch. No one dared go inside. Years later, my brother and I talked about what had happened. He told me that he used to see little boys' faces too, though I never did. For me, it was always just the lady in the white gown. We both remembered the strange noises from the kitchen at night, clattering dishes only to wake up and find them stacked all over the floor. It happened so often that we just got used to it. There were also strange things in the bathroom. It had 2 doors, each with eye hooks on the inside, but sometimes the doors would lock themselves, trapping us inside. My brother would get scared and call the police. They came out multiple times, but they were always puzzled. The window in the bathroom, which was locked from the inside, was too high for anyone to climb through, yet the door hooks kept locking on their own. I remember one time, a policeman and policewoman came and said they felt the house was haunted. We hated calling the police so often, but we didn't know what else to do. Things took a darker turn when my mom started to change, and I was placed in foster care at the age of 9. My brother and sister were much older than me and moved out on their own. I was terrified in every foster home I lived in, always afraid that I would see the lady again. Thankfully, I never did. Someone once told me as a child to never go back to that house, and I never have. The house is located in Los Baños, California, near the downtown area. I remember there being old pictures in our back porch, people we didn't recognize, and my brother always said they gave him the creeps. I still wonder why that lady haunted us. Why was she always wearing that crown? What was her connection to us? My mom got better over the years, and by the time I was 11 or 12, my brother moved her in with him, and I was able to take care of her every day until both of them eventually passed away. But for some reason, I can't stop thinking about that house lately, even though I've tried so hard to forget. I'm still curious about the lady and why she wore that crown. It was a bright, sunny day, and I was sitting on my bed working on my college assignments. I was enrolled at Cypress College in Cypress, California, and I lived in Anaheim with my 2 little boys. They had gone on vacation for the last semester so I could focus on my studies. I was reading my journalism textbook, sitting upright with the book in my lap, when suddenly, something strange happened. As clear as day, I could see into another realm. It was as if I was in 2 places at once. I was still on my bed, but at the same time I found myself in the sky descending toward a helicopter. Inside the helicopter, I saw a Hispanic man in the pilot's seat. His body went limp, he fainted right there, mid-flight. The co-pilot, a calm-looking Caucasian man with a military-style buzz cut, sat beside him. Though I could sense his fear, he remained composed, staring straight ahead as the helicopter began to plummet. Even though I was a spirit, I somehow seemed physical as I ascended into the pilot's seat. Realizing we were falling fast, I panicked. I fumbled with the controls, desperately pulling gears and flipping switches. Tears welled up as I tried everything I could to stop the crash. We were heading straight for a 1-story building, and I had to act fast. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the co-pilot slowly turn his head toward me. He stared at me for a few seconds, our eyes meeting briefly. But then he looked away, his face expressionless, as if resigned to the fate that awaited us. Despite my presence, he knew we were going down. I kept turning the helicopter's wheel to the right, trying to steer us away from the building, but we were still falling. That's when I noticed a man standing below in the parking lot. He was frozen in place, staring up at us, not moving a muscle as the helicopter hurtled toward him. I was in disbelief he had time to run, but he didn't move. My panic surged again. Not only were we going to crash, but this man was about to be caught in the destruction. It wasn't a dream. I was fully aware that I was still sitting on my bed in Anaheim, California. I could feel the weight of both realities, and I felt utterly helpless. The helicopter nicked the edge of the building, and then we hit the pavement with a massive thump that reverberated through my body and soul. I saw the impact ripple through the man below. Thick, black smoke billowed up in a mushroom cloud, and flames engulfed the wreckage. The pilot had been unconscious long before the crash, and the co-pilot remained staring straight ahead, emotionless until the very end. In an instant, I was back on my bed, my heart racing. The experience was so overwhelming that I jumped up and ran out of my bedroom. I couldn't stay in that space. Desperate to escape what I had just witnessed, I turned on the TV, only to see the scene unfolding live on the news. I quickly turned it off and fled my apartment, needing to be around people, to feel the warmth of the California sun. Outside, I stood against the wall of my apartment, shaking. My neighbors, a Hispanic family who played in a band, saw me and asked what was wrong. I couldn't bring myself to explain. I just stood there, unable to speak, until they went inside. I wandered to the Texaco gas station across the street, hoping to distract myself. I browsed the shelves in the mart for about 5 minutes, making brief eye contact with the cashier, but I didn't buy anything. After a while, I went back to my apartment, but I still couldn't go inside. I sat on the steps for hours, too shaken to return. Eventually, I went back in and prayed. I asked God to never let this happen again. It felt like part of my spirit was still at the crash site in Los Angeles, even though I could no longer see it. For days, I couldn't bear to turn on the TV. I distracted myself by watching my children's movies, trying to block out the memory of the crash. But I couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness. I had tried so hard to save those men, yet the helicopter still crashed. I wondered why I was in that helicopter, why I had been given the chance to intervene if I couldn't stop the disaster. The image of the co-pilot, staring straight ahead with no expression, haunted me, and the man standing below, frozen in fear as the helicopter plummeted toward him. Why hadn't he moved? It took a long time for the overwhelming emotions to subside. Eventually, I felt like I could cope, but I still avoided reading the news. I didn't need to see the headlines to know what had happened. 6 years later, I felt strong enough to look up the article about the crash. I went to the Aliso Viejo library, where the librarian helped me search through the microfilm. After what felt like hours, we finally found it. There it was, the helicopter crash I had witnessed. The pilot and co-pilot were exactly as I remembered them, right down to the expressionless face of the co-pilot. As I read through the article, I realized that the helicopter had been a police helicopter. The building I had tried to avoid hitting was an elementary school. And the man standing in the parking lot? He had been a third victim. I had been the ghost in that police helicopter. After a long stretch of nothing strange happening, the past few days have been full of bizarre experiences, as if the universe is making up for the uneventful month I've had. The first incident happened last Friday evening around 7 or 8 p.m. My fiancé and I had just ordered food at a fast food drive-thru. As I pulled my car around the corner toward the pay window, I saw something that gave me chills. A large, dark shape moving impossibly fast across the parking lot at the end of the drive-thru. In just 2 bounding leaps, it had cleared a span of at least 10 feet. It was too small to be a person and completely solid black. Instinctively, I felt it was an animal, but I've never seen anything like it before in California. Certainly not anything that large moving that quickly. I turned to my fiancé and told him what I had seen, and he surprised me by sharing his own unsettling experience from earlier that night. On his way to my house, he said he had caught a glimpse of something strange. A white dress walking down a side street, but with no body attached to it. The thought gave me the creeps. The second incident happened just yesterday afternoon while I was at work. This was particularly odd because nothing strange had ever happened in that building before. I work in a busy warehouse where there are usually at least 5 people around, and more than 50 in the rest of the facility. At around 10 a.m., only one other person was in the warehouse with me, and the doors were all shut. Everyone else was either on break or running errands somewhere else in the building. I stood up to move a package over to a pallet just a few feet from my desk when I suddenly heard a distinct moaning sound, almost like a whimper, coming from right beside my desk. It was a male voice, muffled but quite loud. Startled, I looked up to see if it had come from my coworker, but he was hunched over his keyboard, working as usual. The sound had been too close to me for it to have been him, and the strangest part was that I usually sense presences before I hear them. But this time I hadn't sensed a thing. As soon as I sat back down, a cold gust of wind swept over my hands and face. There were no open doors, and it was over 70 degrees outside. The experience left me baffled. Though it might be unrelated, the company I work for manufactures medical instruments, and upstairs there are cadaver parts stored in freezers for surgical demonstrations. While I doubt any spirits connected to those parts would linger around here, the whole thing was undeniably odd. The third incident happened just last night while my fiancé and I were having a deep conversation. We had started talking about politics in the spirit of the recent inauguration, but our conversation shifted to scientific research and the possibility of life on other planets. We were so engrossed in our discussion that we barely noticed it had grown dark. We were sitting in the living room with a clear view of our large kitchen when, out of nowhere, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I glanced toward the kitchen and saw a glowing white, human-shaped figure reflected in one of the cabinet doors. It moved quickly across the living room, right near where we were sitting. I stopped mid-sentence, staring, and my fiancé asked what was wrong. I brushed it off, saying, "Nothing, I just thought I saw something." We continued talking, but just moments later, My fiancé suddenly paused mid-sentence, staring at the exact same spot where I had seen the figure. He stood up and looked toward the media room behind the living room, trying to figure out if something had caused the strange reflection we both saw. There were no lights coming from outside, and the only light on in the house was a small nightlight plugged into the kitchen, which was too far away from the cabinets to reflect anything. I asked him what he had seen, and he described the same thing I had witnessed without me telling him. He saw a glowing white figure in the shape of a person moving quickly across the room. Feeling uneasy, we decided to finish our conversation with the lights on. Now, I'm wondering, do you think something has attached itself to either me or my fiancé? It seems like whatever this is moves between us, as we've both had strange experiences separately and together. The thing is, I don't really feel scared when these things happen, just startled. There's no sense of a bad presence or anything, just odd occurrences. It was around 10 p.m. last night, and I was trying my best to fall asleep. But for some odd reason, I kept tossing and turning, unable to settle down. I thought I heard something, but I brushed it off, telling myself I needed to sleep. I had to get up early to get my husband off to work and watch my granddaughter, so I knew I needed the rest. Despite trying to calm my mind, I just couldn't sleep. Then, I felt something strange. A light touch on my lower back, like 3 fingers gently pressing against me. I immediately went into denial. This isn't happening again, I thought to myself. I won't let it. I tried to distract my mind, but soon after, I heard whispering. It was the same eerie whispering I'd heard before, and it sent a wave of fear through me. I was lying with my back turned away from my husband, trying to ignore it. A few minutes after the whisper, my husband, who was sleeping beside me, started making noises. He sounded scared, almost like he was yelling in his sleep. By that time, I was terrified. I turned to look at him, and as soon as I did, his eyes flew open, and he swung his arm down. For a moment, I thought he was going to hit me. I asked him what had happened, but he said he didn't know. The next day, when he got home from work, I asked if he remembered having a nightmare, but he didn't. He didn't even recall our conversation from the night before. I don't know what time I eventually fell asleep, but the next morning, something strange happened. My daughter, who had to be at work by 9 a.m., called me first thing. She told me, "Mom, Aunt C is here, sitting in my garage." My sister had been missing for months, and we hadn't been able to find her. I was so relieved to hear she was there. I told my daughter that I hadn't been able to sleep the night before and had felt like something was going on. It's hard to explain, but sometimes I get this uneasy feeling when something's about to happen. I can't pinpoint why I feel that way, but sure enough, the next day something always does. This wasn't the first time. One night, I couldn't sleep, but nothing out of the ordinary happened until the next morning. At 5 a.m., my daughter woke us up to tell me that my twin son had been trying to call me all night, but we didn't answer. Our phone's ringer was off, and we hadn't heard his calls. He was in the hospital, about to undergo emergency surgery because his appendix had ruptured. Of course, I rushed to the hospital, but I told my daughter, I couldn't sleep last night. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what or why. Just like last night, I couldn't sleep, and strange things started happening again. My sister left later that day, and I don't know when I'll see her again. Hopefully, it'll be soon. I can't help but wonder if the whispers, the touch on my back, and the agitation I felt while trying to sleep were signs that someone was trying to tell me my sister was nearby. Who knows for sure? Since my brother's passing last year, I felt more in tune with things, or maybe I was before and I just didn't notice it until he was gone. The other day, I was certain I felt my daughter's presence outside the house. I went to the front door, fully expecting to see her car in the driveway, but it wasn't there. Just as I turned, she came around the corner and pulled in. When she got out, she asked, "Mom, how did you know I was coming?" I told her I didn't. I had just felt like she was already here. We were both a little freaked out by it. I had another experience a few months back, a dream about my father-in-law, who passed away 4 years ago. In the dream, he told me to take care of my mother-in-law and that something bad was going to happen to her. The next day, I told my husband he needed to check on his mom, and she was fine at the time. But a few weeks later, My mother-in-law called to tell us that her sister-in-law was trying to take her home from her. It turned into a legal mess, and it's still going on. I feel like my father-in-law was warning me in that dream. As for my sister, she's in a tough place in her life. She stayed with us for a while, and there were some strange occurrences during her stay that I'll write about another time. I love her dearly, but it's hard to be around her for too long because of the negative energy I feel when she's near. I try not to let it affect me, but it's nearly impossible. I've debated for years whether I should talk about what I saw on my nephew's forehead the day he was born. Out of respect for his privacy, I won't share too many personal details, but I can't ignore what I witnessed. My nephew was born on June 6, 1998. I went to the hospital with my mother to meet my brother's first child. As we walked into the room, my mother picked up the baby, and I leaned over to peer into his sleepy little face. Suddenly, my nephew opened his eyes and looked up at both of us. What we saw was beyond unusual. His eyes were a piercing crystal blue, and they looked almost like cat's eyes. This lasted only a second before he closed them and drifted back to sleep. My mother saw it too. We were both startled, but before we could even process that, I noticed something else, something strange on his forehead. There, between his eyes and across his nose bridge, was a series of pigment blotches that formed a clear image. It wasn't random. It was the figure of a beautiful being bathed in a golden light. The being's hands were clasped together in prayer, its face tilted upward, as though it was looking into the light shining down on it. The figure looked like an angel, but something was off. There were no eyes, just dark voids where they should have been. Its face had an almost cat-like quality, with a short, delicate nose. It had long, flowing chestnut hair and large, white wings that extended from my nephew's forehead. The figure wore a classic angelic robe with a thick waistband, almost like a Japanese obi. The more I looked, the more I could see. The angel had a double set of wings, like a butterfly, two above and two below its arms. It was magnificent in posture, clearly praising something or someone in the light. It even resembled a cross. I pointed this out to my mother, and at first she agreed she could see it too. But her tone quickly changed. She started denying it, insisting she hadn't seen anything, and warned me not to speak of it, fearing it might somehow endanger my nephew. Even in his first baby photos, the angel was faintly visible, but it was always clearer in person. It was as if I was looking at another dimension right there on his skin. This image stayed on my nephew's forehead for 2 months while I was caring for him as his nanny. By then, his eyes had turned brown, and I no longer saw the cat-like eyes. I felt that whatever this angelic figure was, it had only revealed itself to me and my mother that one time in the hospital. But the more I studied the angel, the more uneasy I became. I noticed something disturbing. Nestled in the crook of the angel's right arm was what looked like a triton, a pitchfork. I couldn't help but wonder why an angel would be holding something associated with the devil. Was this a destroying angel? And hanging from its clasped hands appeared to be an amulet or perhaps a timepiece, though I couldn't make out the details. The whole image was unsettling, especially when I realized that the angel's face looked strangely familiar, like mine, except for the missing eyes and the small nose. When the angelic image eventually faded, I couldn't stop thinking about its meaning. I spoke to a spiritualist for advice, and he suggested that the angel I saw could be my nephew's other self, a reflection of his spirit. Nothing unusual has ever happened with my nephew. He grew up as a normal child, though he always had a fascination with my long hair, staring at it intently when I let it down, perhaps because it resembled the angel's. For many years, I was my nephew's guardian and felt deeply protective of him, sometimes even more than his own parents. He's a well-behaved boy, nothing extraordinary about him, no unusual powers or strange abilities. He attends a Seventh-day Adventist private school and was baptized as a Christian Baptist. His life is normal and he gets sick just like any other child. Yet, I can't help but wonder what kind of man he will become, and whether that angel was a good one, truly devoted to God. My wife, our 6 children, hers, mine, and ours, and I have been living in a home in the Sacramento area for 2 years now. The house is part of a new development and was brand new when we moved in, so there's no particular history attached to the house itself. However, as we all know, there's always some sort of history attached to the land a house is built on. Not even a year into living here, strange things began happening. My wife and I started noticing what looked like someone peeking their head around the corner of a neighboring room, as if they were spying on us. With 6 kids, we naturally assumed they were playing another round of I Spy and having a little fun. So, I would call out to them or run into the other room, expecting to find one of them giggling behind the wall. But every time there was no one there. Then it started happening when the kids weren't even home, and that's when things got more unsettling. My wife and I would both see what looked like someone peeking around the corner, only for the figure to vanish when we turned to look. This kept happening. Something or someone seemed to be watching us from the next room, only to disappear when we caught a glimpse. A few months later, things escalated. I began seeing what I can only describe as a black, shadowy figure, always low to the ground, either crouching or crawling along the floor. Startled me at first, but it didn't cause panic. The shadow would vanish just as soon as I laid eyes on it. The figure never had a distinct human shape like the ones standing around corners, but my immediate reaction was always the same. It looks like someone crouching or hiding under a black blanket, crawling around the floor of my home. Things took an even stranger turn when I was out running errands with my 10-year-old daughter. I casually asked her, "Have you ever seen anything out of the corner of your eye?" That's all I said, no hints, no details, no coaching. To my utter shock and horror, she said, "Well, I didn't want to tell you or Sarah, her stepmom, but sometimes when I enter a room, I see what looks like a dark figure laying or crawling on the ground. The few hairs left on my head stood on end." My daughter, with no prior knowledge of what I had been seeing, described the exact same thing I had witnessed. Couldn't believe it. Then my 9-year-old son chimed in, sharing his own experience. He said he had walked into his brother's room and saw what looked like a blue blanket darting across the floor, only for it to vanish moments later. It was eerily similar to the feeling I'd had, as if someone was crawling under a blanket. My wife has also seen these dark, shadowy figures in various rooms of the house, including our master closet. When my in-laws stayed over to watch the kids while we were on a cruise to Alaska in May, my mother-in-law confessed that she kept seeing a dark figure while doing dishes. It seemed to watch her through a plant we have on the kitchen counter. As soon as she turned to look, it disappeared. I've experienced the same thing. I've seen something behind our couch while washing dishes. It was so clear that I swore it was our 6-year-old playing a game. But when I looked, no one was there. In hindsight, we recalled how, when our baby was just a few months old, she would often look up at the corners of the family room, waving and saying, "Hi," to things that we couldn't see. Our dog and other pets haven't reacted to anything unusual, though. Recently, we decided to take things a step further and contacted a paranormal investigation team. They're coming to our home soon, and we're curious to see what they find. What's most intriguing to all of us, including the investigators, is that 3 adults and 2 children are all witnessing the same shadowy figures under the same roof. We're not scared, but we are deeply intrigued. We want to know what it is and why it's here. This experience has sparked a fascination in me for ghost-related topics. I've since become an avid reader of paranormal books, blogs, websites, and TV shows. I'd love to hear others' thoughts on this and whether anyone else has had similar encounters. I'm amazed at how many people I know have shared their own experiences with shadowy figures. Since October 13th, 2008, what started as recurring dreams involving an incubus has crossed over into my waking life, culminating in a terrifying experience in my bedroom on Saturday, February 7th, 2009, at around 9:25 p.m. I know that this site doesn't typically focus on dreams, but this demonic figure seems to have come straight out of those dreams, manifesting into reality. I'm sharing this because I wonder if anyone else has experienced something similar. Here's how it all began. On October 13th, 2008, I had my first dream of the incubus. In it, he was performing violent and sadomasochistic acts on women who desired it. He even killed one of them. But afterward, it was like a switch flipped. He became surprisingly pleasant to talk to, almost like a friend. I was confused by his sudden change in demeanor and even commented, "You seem nice, though." He gave me a wicked grin and corrected me, friendly. Despite witnessing his cruelty, I found myself trying to be friendly and said, "For some reason, I still like you, but perhaps I shouldn't have said that." As the dream progressed, the incubus began walking me home at night. I became increasingly afraid, sensing that he could harm me at any moment. Just as I was trying to figure out how to escape, a bolt of lightning struck the ground behind me, coming from the east. The incubus jumped back, narrowly avoiding the strike. He quickly ran for cover. Suddenly, to my right, 3 angels descended from the sky, each armed with weapons that threw lightning bolts. They looked both beautiful and dangerous. I didn't want to get caught in the middle of a supernatural battle, so I tried to slip away. But one of the angels grabbed me by the arm and said sternly, "Come on." Instinctively, I obeyed without saying a word. He instructed me to hold onto his back, and before I knew it, I was transported away from the incubus, ending up in what looked like an airport terminal or some public place. I received a phone call, and to my surprise, it was the incubus angrily asking, "Why did you go with them?" I replied, "I didn't think arguing with angels was wise." The dream ended there, but it left a lasting impression. On January 9th, 2009, the incubus returned in another dream, but this time he was more menacing. I found myself standing by a main street near my home at around 4 a.m. There were no cars, and I was about to cross the street when I noticed a billboard advertising a concert I wanted to attend. Excited, I turned to rush home, only to come face to face with the incubus. This time, he was dressed more nicely, almost as if he was ready for a date. He looked at me with a mix of delight and romantic interest, standing silently on the sidewalk. I brushed him off and took flight, soaring through the neighborhood toward my home. As I flew, I heard him yelling after me, "Hey, wait! What about? Just you wait." He used my full name. "I'll find you." His anger was palpable, and I could feel his determination to track me down. I tried to lose him by flying through the treetops, but he threw something that stuck to the palm of my left hand, like a sticky note. I frantically tried to shake it off, flying through the dense leaves. By the time I landed on my front porch, the feeling of something stuck to my hand persisted even after I woke up. It was around 2 a.m., and I was terrified. I began praying, especially to Michael the Archangel, asking for protection from this demon who had vowed to find me. Now, fast forward to February 6th, 2009. It was a quiet afternoon around 1 to 2 p.m., and I was at home relaxing, listening to music in my bedroom. I was standing by the window, looking out at the pine trees in the backyard, when I saw something that made my heart race. There, standing near the trees, was a man, the same incubus from my dreams. I only saw him for a split second before he quickly drifted to his right, hiding behind the curtains that were tied back. This time, it wasn't a dream. He was there in my backyard in broad daylight. Though I was alarmed, I tried not to panic and wrote the incident down to process it later. The next day, February 7th, 2009, around 5 p.m., I decided to take a nap before dinner. I slept peacefully without any disturbing dreams. But when I opened my eyes, I was instantly filled with terror. Leaning over my chest was a black shadow figure, staring directly into my face. It wasn't a dream, it was real. I could clearly see the form of a man hovering over me, even though the room was dark. He was as defined as any person leaning over you while you slept. I jolted in fear, my heart racing, but I wasn't paralyzed like people often describe when encountering dark entities. The shadow had a full torso, shoulders, and head, but I couldn't make out any facial features. He was just a solid, black silhouette. I couldn't see his lower body, as he was either standing through me and the bed, or his lower half was on top of my abdomen. Within moments, he dissolved into nothing. Despite the terror, I forced myself to remain calm, knowing that fear would only give him more power. I leaned back on my pillow and, slightly cocky, said aloud, "So you found me. What do you want?" There was no response. I glanced at the clock. 9:25 p.m. I turned over onto my left side and began to pray. As I closed my eyes, I saw an afterimage of his eyes. Intense, greenish hazel eyes, staring fiercely into mine, full of possessiveness. It was as if he had been that close to my face while I slept. I prayed for protection, asking God to keep me safe. When I got up to make dinner, my stomach felt sore, as if I had been doing sit-ups. I told my mom what had happened, trying to make sense of it all. In the days that followed, I kept wondering what he wanted. He didn't physically harm me, but the experience was haunting. I kept coming across the words, "I found you," in random places, books online, almost as if it was a message meant for me. I've never used a Ouija board or played with tarot cards. I've always avoided anything that might invite something dark into my life. But somehow, this incubus found me, and I still don't know why. When I was about 3 years old, in 1951, I lived with my grandparents in their new home on El Dorado Street, Pacoima, Los Angeles, California. My parents had separated, so I moved in with my grandparents, who had just relocated to Southern California. At the time, there were about 8 other relatives living in the house: my grandparents, 3 of my uncles, my mother, my little brother, and my baby sister. The house was under renovation and the bedrooms were being remodeled, so I slept on the floor in the living room, about 20 feet from a large, old stone fireplace. The fireplace was so big, a person could stand in it. My mother and brother stayed in the converted garage, which was made into a 2-bedroom apartment, while my uncles shared the other room. My baby sister slept in my grandparents' master bedroom, so I was left alone in the living room. At first, I didn't mind sleeping alone in such a big room, but that's when the nightly hauntings began. Every night, everyone in the house would fall asleep around 9 p.m., but I would be woken up by the sound of a bell jingling softly in the distance. As the sound grew louder, it would wake me completely. The jingling seemed to be coming from the kitchen, which was behind where I slept, with my feet pointed toward the fireplace. Curious and scared, I would roll over and peek into the kitchen. I could see the old back door with a skeleton keyhole, and the sound appeared to be coming from there. Then, I saw something terrifying. A thin, smoky mist started seeping through the door. It drifted down toward the floor and began to take shape, forming into ghostly figures. What emerged from the smoke were life-sized horses and medieval soldiers in armor, like knights from a distant time. They moved from the kitchen into the living room, walking or trotting straight toward where I lay on the floor. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to scream because I didn't want to scare anyone else in the house. I watched as they lined up their horses in front of the fireplace, but some stayed behind me. Then, I saw 4 hooded monks dressed in light beige robes. The monks took positions at each corner of my quilt, and behind them stood a figure that terrified me even more: an executioner. He was dressed in a black hood and carried a large axe, standing ominously at the foot of my bed. Strangely, the quilt I was lying on suddenly became solid, like a bed or a stretcher. The monks bent down, grabbed the corners of my quilt, and began lifting me into the air. I could feel the sensation of being carried, and I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in terror. Pretending to be asleep, I stayed completely still, hoping they wouldn't notice I was awake. They started carrying me toward the fireplace, and the whole procession, knights, monks, and the executioner, moved with me. The mood felt overwhelmingly sad as they carried me deeper into the fireplace, which now seemed to open up into a long brick cavern or tunnel. As they moved further into the tunnel, I was so frightened that I finally screamed, unable to take it any longer. The moment I screamed, everything vanished. I found myself back in my sleeping area in the living room, but my cries had woken everyone in the house. They were upset and yelled at me for alarming them in the middle of the night. This didn't happen just once. It became a nightly occurrence. Every time, the procession would carry me further into the dark tunnel before I would scream and wake up. My grandparents were getting frustrated, and I was completely exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I began to wonder if it was a dream or something more, but to me, it all felt too real. Each night, the experience was the same. They would take me deeper into the stone tunnel, and I would scream and cry, desperate for it to stop. Eventually, my mother decided to take me to a local Mexican, which in a nearby barrio in Pacoima. I still remember the old woman. She listened as I told her what was happening, and she assured me that I was being visited by something from the past. She said she would help me get rid of it. She performed a ritual with alcohol, herbs, and holy water, saying prayers or incantations over me. Even though I still felt scared, I was so exhausted by the nightly hauntings that I decided I wouldn't scream anymore, no matter what. The last time it happened, they carried me further than ever before. This time, they took me into a tomb. They laid me on something inside and sealed the tomb, leaving me there alone. But I didn't scream. I simply lay there, and eventually, I fell asleep. When I woke up, I was back in the living room, and for the first time I felt a sense of peace. I was still worried that the hauntings might return, but at some point, they stopped altogether. Shortly after that, my grandparents moved me into one of the garage bedrooms, and the nightly visits never came back. This also happened at my grandparents' home on El Dorado Street in Pacoima, California, back in 1952. I was 4 years old by then, and we had moved into the garage, which had been converted into bedrooms. The room was quite large, with one queen-sized bed and 2 twin beds. My mom shared the queen bed with my little brother, while I slept on one of the twin beds. My younger uncle slept on the other twin bed to my right. The foot of my bed faced the wall, and the head of my bed was aligned in the direction of my mom's queen-sized bed. But on this particular night, my mom wasn't there, and my brother was sleeping alone in the bed behind me. In the middle of the night, something woke me up. It wasn't a sound or noise. It was more like an internal feeling, like something in my mind urging me to look behind me at my mom's bed. Everything was quiet and everyone else was asleep. When I turned to look, I saw what I thought was a black coat or a large sweater draped over the edge of my mom's bed, hanging down to the floor. I didn't expect to see anything unusual, but as I looked closer, the black shape began to move. What had seemed like a lifeless object started to lift what looked like a head and shoulders, slowly turning its back to me. I was terrified. Before it could fully turn toward me, I quickly laid back down and pretended to be asleep, pulling the blanket over my head and squeezing my eyes shut. But even with my eyes closed tight, I could see something. Those glowing, phosphorescent green eyes staring right at me. No matter what I did, I couldn't escape those eyes. The shadowy figure got up and began moving slowly around the head of my bed, walking along the left side of where I lay. It moved cautiously, as if trying to figure me out, its eyes never leaving me. I tried to stay still, pretending to sleep, but I was terrified. It glided toward the wall that my feet faced and, after a moment, passed right through it, disappearing. The figure wasn't shaped like a regular person. It had arms and legs, and it stood upright, but it was short and misshapen. Its body seemed deformed, almost moldy, and it had no discernible neck. But what scared me the most were those glowing, green eyes that seemed to burn into me. After that night, I refused to sleep in the garage anymore. I moved back into the house and was finally able to sleep peacefully again. About a month later, we had a family reunion, and my older uncles came to visit. To accommodate everyone, they set up more beds in the garage bedrooms. 7 family members shared the 2 rooms that night. The next morning, as they gathered in the kitchen, I overheard them talking and laughing. They were making jokes about a little headless hole they had chased out of the garage in the middle of the night, around 2 a.m. One of my uncles said he had seen a small, shadowy figure in the garage and yelled at it, "Hey, what are you doing in here? Get out." The figure took off running, and my uncles, not afraid, went after it. They chased the shadowy figure through the backyard, yelling and swearing at it, daring it to come back and face them like a man. The figure ran straight into a large cactus and disappeared. My uncles thought it was a joke, saying things like, "You're lucky we didn't get a hold of you," and "We'll be waiting for you next time." They were laughing, but I knew they had seen the same figure I had. They joked that the figure looked headless, but I realized it wasn't actually headless. Its body was so deformed and misshapen that it only looked like it had no head. The strange figure never came back after that incident. Years later, when I was married and living in Northern California with my husband and our 3 children, I began dedicating myself to studying the Bible and Christianity. As I reflected on my childhood, I thought about that shadowy figure I had seen. I started to feel pity for it, and I prayed for the figure, hoping that God might grant it some peace. However, that turned out to be a mistake. After I began praying for the shadow figure, I started having horrible dreams about it. In these dreams, the figure would come to me, and its presence was anything but friendly. I quickly stopped praying for it after that. I realized that whatever it was, only God could help it. One night, when I was 10 years old, I was sleeping in my own room. The house was massive, even though it was only one story, and in certain spots it would echo. It was located in Modesto, California, although I can't recall the exact place. Even after living there for a couple of months, I never felt completely alone, even when I knew I was. That night, like usual, I said my prayers and climbed under my comforter, falling asleep around 10. In about 10 minutes, I lost consciousness. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up to a strange noise coming from my door. At first, I thought it was my younger siblings messing with me, as they often did. But when I looked, the door was open. A strange tingling sensation crawled up my spine as I stared at it. I tried to think logically. Maybe it was a mouse or something. There was a Walmart bag hanging from the door, so I got out of bed to take it off. As soon as I did, the noise stopped completely. Relieved, I lay back down, but within seconds, it started again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. My breathing became heavier, and I felt panic setting in. Just in case, I thought, I got out of bed more slowly this time. The noise stopped again, and I placed a pile of clothes in front of the door, hoping that would stop whatever was causing it. But as soon as I lay back down, it resumed. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I didn't know what to do, so I bolted to my parents' room, running down the hall in a panic. The scratching was getting louder and stronger, but my mom didn't believe me when I told her what was happening. She just told me to sleep in my siblings' room. I had no choice but to go next door to my sister and brother's room. Their room was only a couple of feet away from mine. My little sister was half asleep when I asked if I could lie on her bed, but she refused, rolling off her couch bed and tossing me a blanket. I lay down on the floor, still too scared to go back to my own room. As I lay there, I glanced around the dark room and then out the door towards my own. I eventually calmed down and closed my eyes. Scratch, scratch, scratch. My eyes shot open. The sound was even worse this time, and it felt closer, so close since I was lying by the door, and my room was just next door. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my blanket and ran back to my parents' room, where I threw myself onto the floor and finally fell asleep. But just before I drifted off, I remembered something. A week earlier, my friends and I had used a Ouija board in my room. We had been blindfolded and we got a response. Ever since that night, I never had another experience quite like that in the house, but I've always felt uneasy thinking about it. I don't care if anyone believes me. I would never want to go back to that house again, especially not to stay the night. On the morning of January 13th, 2009, just before 8 a.m., I experienced something that I could never have prepared for. A battle with a powerful, demonic being. My encounters with angels and otherworldly entities often start in dreams but have a way of spilling over into my waking life. However, nothing I'd faced before compared to the terrifying battle that unfolded this time. Before I woke, I found myself in a terrible situation, facing off against a massive male demon. He was enormous, standing around 7 to 8 feet tall, muscular but not like a bodybuilder, more like a giant. He had no hair, not even stubble on his head, and he wasn't wearing a shirt, almost as if he was proud of his intimidating size. As he approached me, I felt fear creeping in, but I didn't run. I didn't think there was anywhere to run to. I was unarmed and could only try to avoid his attacks, backing up to keep my distance. Occasionally, I tried to kick or punch him in the gut, but my hits didn't faze him. He had a strange weapon, a small, black will about 2 inches thick and 5 inches in diameter. Around the edges, sharp metal blades jutted out, resembling a spiked Chinese throwing star. He would hurl it at me and I couldn't avoid it. The weapon sliced into my upper arm like a razor, then curved back and returned to his hand. At the same time, I noticed that he wasn't alone. A smaller female figure, shorter than me, with red hair and dressed in what looked like a Russian officer's uniform, approached. She seemed like she was either his companion or perhaps a partner in the fight. As she lunged at me from his left side, I instinctively formed a ball of energy in my hand and threw it at her, knocking her back. "Butt out!" I shouted, irritated. But she wasn't finished. She came at me again from his right side, clearly intent on helping the demon attack me. Frustrated, I yelled, "God rebuke you," a phrase that felt strange but right in the moment. I didn't want to curse because I felt like God was watching, and I definitely needed his help against these demons. After my shout, something unseen yanked the woman away so violently that she flew back and didn't return. Now it was just me and the giant demon. He threw his bladed weapon again, and this time, it sliced into my legs, cutting through my pants and leaving me bleeding below the knees. He laughed cruelly and said, "I'm going to slice you up." I looked down at my wounds, blood soaking through my pants, but I told myself, as long as I can still stand, I can still fight. As he threw the weapon again, I decided I would try to catch it. Timing my move carefully, I leaped and grabbed it midair, the blades cutting into my hand. Ignoring the pain, I rushed at him and slashed a large X across his chest. He looked down at me with amusement, almost as if mocking me for thinking it would hurt him. But then, something inside me said to carve a cross into him instead. I followed that instinct, slashing a horizontal line across his biceps and a vertical one down his abdomen, creating the shape of a cross. I backed up a few feet, waiting to see what would happen. For a moment, the demon looked bewildered, his eyes widening in surprise. "Oh," he gasped. I switched his weapon to my left hand because the blades had cut deep into my right palm, leaving it bloodied. Then, to my horror, he started laughing, a deep, rumbling sound that grew louder and louder. He looked at me with a smile and said, "God, you're beautiful." Without warning, he charged at me like a linebacker. I was so small compared to him, and I couldn't move fast enough to escape. He grabbed me and lifted me up, crushing me against his massive chest in a bear hug. His weapon slipped out of my hand, leaving me defenseless. At first, I panicked, rigid with fear. His face was close to mine, and I could see the top of his bald head as I looked down. I tried to push off him, but I was pinned. There was nothing I could do except surrender and trust God to decide what happened next. Slowly, I let go of my resistance, resting my head against his right shoulder. Despite everything, I felt bad for cutting him like I had. I knew his blood was probably all over me. As he held me, he whispered in a deep, rumbly voice, "I wish I could have had children with you." His words should have terrified me, but instead, they left me feeling strangely compassionate. At some point, he let me pull back, though he still held me like a child in his arms. I noticed that the cuts on my wrist from his weapon were now wrapped in butcher paper, like a fancy-wrapped turkey leg, even decorated with red and green lines that reminded me of blood. I joked, "I look like a turkey," and he glanced at my wrist before looking back into my eyes. By this point, it felt like something had changed inside him, like his heart had softened somehow. Could the cross I'd carved into him have caused that change? He no longer seemed like a threat to me. Shortly after that, I woke up. As I opened my eyes, I saw a bright white orb flying in circles above my bed. It was 8 a.m., and the orb didn't seem to care that I could see it. It continued flying around for about half an hour. I remember asking in my mind, who was the demon I fought in my dream? A voice answered, "Barakiel." And I even saw the name flash in my mind, spelled out clearly. Later that day, I looked up the name in my angelic dictionary. I learned that Barakiel, or Barakiel, Barakiel, etc., was once an archangel mentioned in the book of Enoch. He was one of the fallen angels, known as a watcher who took mortal women and fathered children with them, an abomination in the eyes of heaven. In Eastern Orthodox traditions, Barakiel is depicted as a good angel, one who blesses marriages and families. However, his past is more complicated. He is also known to inhabit the nether realms as a demon, a teacher of astrology. I couldn't shake the feeling of compassion I had for him. His words, "I wish I could have had children with you," should have frightened me, but instead, they left me feeling conflicted. I couldn't help but wonder what his true nature was, and whether, despite his fall, there was still some part of him that wasn't entirely lost. After waking from the dream, I dressed in a beautiful white satin and chiffon peignoir, feeling upset that I'd had to face such a battle alone. No angels had come to help me, and I was frustrated. I went outside to pray, thanking God for helping me survive and for the strange, almost positive resolution to the fight. As I returned inside, my mother, who was in the kitchen, remarked that she could smell a strong scent of gardenias on me. But we didn't have any gardenias around the house, and I hadn't used any gardenia-scented products. As I continued researching Barracuda, I found out that he is often depicted with a white rose, though I now believe the white rose may actually be a gardenia. It made me wonder why he appeared bald in my dream. Legends say that when angels fall from grace, they are burned in their descent, and their wings are sometimes torn from them. Could the fire of his fall have burned off his hair? Even now, I'm left unsure of how I should feel. Was Barracuda truly a demon? Or is there more to his story? What should I make of his words? I've lived in a tiny town in Illinois for almost all my life, since I was a young girl. My parents raised my 3 brothers and me in the same house since we were born, and even now they refuse to move. The house is fully paid off, and being their first home as a married couple, they feel deeply attached to it. But that house has always given me creepy feelings. Sometimes, everything would seem fine, and then suddenly, I'd feel like I was being watched, even though I knew no one else was there. I used to tell my mother about it, but she would assure me the house wasn't evil, just a little restless. Over the years, many strange things have happened in that house, though, thankfully, I never experienced most of the stories my mother and brothers told me. I believe it's because I used to pray over and over, asking God not to let me witness anything scary. In fact, I jokingly pray for the spirits to go haunt our neighbors instead, especially since I wasn't too fond of the neighbor's son at the time. My prayers seemed to work, except in 2 places, the restroom and my bedroom. The bedroom is a story for another time. At night, I would often hear my mother go to the restroom. I loved using it as an excuse to get out of bed and talk to her. There were times when I heard what I believed to be my mother's footsteps passing my room, followed by the sound of the toilet flushing. Excited, I'd get out of bed and head to the restroom, expecting to see her. But every time, the bathroom would be empty. I know I was awake, and I'm certain I heard the toilet flush, but no one was ever there. This was just one of the strange occurrences I experienced. Another time, during high school, I developed a habit of making sure everything was closed: closets, shower doors, windows, anything that was meant to be shut. One day, after school, I was walking past the restroom when I noticed the mirror on the medicine cabinet was open. I could clearly see my reflection staring back at me. It irritated me because I always made sure it was closed. I turned around to close it, but when I reached for it, the cabinet was already shut. I was positive I had just seen it open, but now it was closed, as if it had never been open in the first place. That really creeped me out. Another incident happened in the restroom. I was in there when I noticed the towels hanging on the racks started to swing back and forth, as if someone had brushed past them. I checked to see if the vent was on, but it wasn't. It was little things like this that always made my parents' house feel unsettling. I have more stories, but these are just some of the experiences I've had in that house. I truly believe it's something paranormal. Whenever I talk about it, my voice shakes and breaks. My mother always said that the mind is like a switch. If you want to see something, you will, and if you don't, you won't. I think because I refused to experience what my family had, I only witnessed small, creepy things. Where do I even begin? Everything started when I was about 6 years old. I've always seen and experienced strange things. Ghosts, demons, or whatever they might be. It's hard to explain why these things happen to me, but they always have, without me doing anything to provoke them. I remember one time after my aunt passed away, about 2 weeks after she was gone, I started hearing footsteps going up and down our hallway. This was especially eerie because my aunt used to walk that same hallway all the time with her walker before she died. After she passed, that's all I would hear, those familiar footsteps. One night, my sister and I were in our room. We always kept the door slightly open so we wouldn't make too much noise if we had to get up in the night. Around 2 a.m., we saw a black figure pass by our door, moving down the hallway. Right behind it, we saw a white beam of light following it. I'm not sure if it was good versus evil, but whatever it was, it creeped us out. A lot of strange things happened in that house. I remember my mom waking up one night because my dad was screaming in his sleep. She saw something black on top of him, and my dad was fighting with it. Later, we found out that while my dad was in jail, he had made a deal with the devil for protection because he didn't want to die. After that, we realized why so many of these strange things happened when my dad was around. One time, I was in the living room with him watching TV. It was raining outside, and I suddenly felt the urge to look out the window. When I did, I saw a man who looked just like my dad, but his eyes were the darkest I had ever seen. He had this creepy smile, and he was staring out into the street. It felt like he noticed me looking at him because he turned his head, tilting it as if trying to recognize me. I panicked, turned to tell my dad, and when I looked back, that dark figure was gone. The hauntings stopped for a while, but they started again when I was 11. It began after we moved into a new house, and from day one, I had a weird feeling about the place. I couldn't sleep and would always wake up at exactly 3:10 a.m., hearing strange noises in the hallway. I'd open the door to check, but nothing was there. Yet, every time I walked around the house, I felt like something was following me in the darkness, right behind me. This continued every night for 2 years. I'd hear scary voices, and the posters on my wall would shift into terrifying faces. The closet door would open by itself, and I could feel a frightening presence in my room. It got so bad that one night, I almost stabbed my sister. It was as if I was watching myself from outside my body, seeing myself nearly harm her, but I couldn't control it. I'm not joking, it felt like I had no control over my own actions. I ended up running out of the house that night, and as soon as I stepped outside, I felt free, like nothing could control me anymore. But whenever I went back inside, especially in my room, I felt trapped. I spent most of my time laying on the floor in the center of the room, staring at the ceiling, completely disconnected. Sometimes I didn't even remember being there. At night, I never slept, always feeling like something was crawling into my bed, lying down next to me. When we finally moved out, my mom found a Ouija board hidden in the back of my closet and tarot cards stuffed inside the heater. Maybe that's why these things followed me. I'm still trying to find answers. Even now, I feel like something is always following me. I hear knocking on my window when no one is there. I feel random chills, and I sometimes sense something grabbing me. I have bizarre dreams about people I've never met, and some of those dreams even come true. I still don't know what's going on, but I wish I did. My name is Sean Logue, and I'm 19 years old. At the time of the following event, I was 18. The house where it all happened is in West Hills, California. It was early 2009, around 3 a.m. I've always believed there's more to the world than what we can see. For many years, my mother's house had spirits. From harmless footsteps to a stereo system getting knocked over, we learned to live peacefully with whoever, or whatever, remained in the house. One day, my close friend Elijah called me, excited about the idea of conducting a seance. Knowing my experiences with spirits, he asked me to join. At first, I was hesitant but eventually agreed. Elijah wanted to use a Ouija board, but I refused. I'd heard too many horror stories about the dangers of using one, and I didn't want to take that risk. Luckily, the board went missing, so we settled on a seance. None of us had done one before, but we followed guidelines from a medium who was a family friend of Elijah's. We covered mirrors, opened windows, and lit candles. As the only one fully comfortable with the idea, I took on the role of medium. The group consisted of myself, Elijah, his girlfriend Jocelyn, my stepbrother Greg, and our close friend Matt. Two others, Graham and Dak, sat outside the circle, observing. I made it clear that we wouldn't open the circle to just anyone. We needed a plan for choosing which spirit to contact. Elijah wanted to reach out to his grandfather, but there was little success there. What happened next, however, is the focus of this story. For a while, Elijah had been experiencing strange events in his home, footsteps on the roof that seemed to follow his movements. We used this description to connect with a spirit. We asked the spirit to communicate through knocks, 1 knock for yes and 2 for no. I asked if the spirit understood us and if it would speak to us. 1 knock followed, clear and direct, almost too quick to be a coincidence. Even Graham and Dak, sitting outside the circle, heard it. Next, we asked if the spirit was related to Elijah. 2 knocks. No. I then asked if the spirit had lived in the house before. 1 knock. Yes. We were getting somewhere. That's when I noticed Elijah breathing heavily. I asked him if he was okay, and he could only say 2 things. The air behind him was freezing cold, and he felt a weight on his back. I asked if he wanted to stop, but he insisted we continue. The spirit told us it was male, had lived in the house, and had been ill. That's when Elijah remembered something his mother had mentioned. The previous owner, a woman named Barbara, had lived there with her son, who had died from pneumonia. After his death, Barbara and her husband moved away, likely to escape the pain of their loss. Then I asked a question that sent chills through us. Do you intend on leaving? Knock, knock. Elijah muttered, "Oh God," under his breath. Jocelyn, who was holding his hand, asked if he was okay. Elijah said the cold was becoming unbearable, and the weight on his back was heavier. He nearly passed out, and if it hadn't been for Jocelyn and Greg holding him, he would have fallen backward into the bookcase, potentially breaking the circle. Again, I suggested we stop, but Elijah urged me to continue, asking me to try to put the spirit to rest. Elijah then suggested I mention Barbara, hoping it might help the spirit move on. I gave it a try, asking, "Would you like to hear about your mother, Barbara?" Knock. The loudest knock yet came from the window. We all opened our eyes in shock, looking toward the window. No one was there. Graham and Dak, who were observing, had wide eyes, stunned by what had just happened. That's when I felt it, the cold, the weight. It moved from Elijah, past Jocelyn, and settled on me. I was terrified, but I knew I had to keep going. I told the spirit about Barbara's whereabouts and asked if he wanted to find her. Knock, knock. He was content. The spirit was satisfied knowing where his mother had gone. At that point, we were all too drained to continue. We closed the seance, took a deep breath, and regained our composure. Since then, I haven't conducted another seance. I'm too afraid of doing something wrong. I haven't learned anything professional, and I know it's unwise to meddle in things I don't fully understand. Elijah still hears the footsteps, but they no longer follow him. It's a detail I've often pondered, but I choose not to look into it anymore. When I was about 5 years old, my parents purchased their first home. After we settled in, I began to see a tall, dark figure that looked like a man standing in the doorway of whatever room I was in. This only happened at night. He would just stand there, staring at me, but I never felt like he meant me any harm. Some nights, when I didn't see the figure, my toys would turn on by themselves, as if someone was playing with them. There was one toy in particular that seemed to turn on the most. My favorite toy, a plastic big bird that you could play learning games on. I kept it under my bed, and in the middle of the night, I would be woken up by Big Bird's voice saying, "Let's play pick a color. Press the color blue. That is incorrect. Try again. You found blue. Press the color red. That is correct." When I'd pull Big Bird out from under the bed, he would stop working altogether. Even the next day, I couldn't get him to work, not even with new batteries. But without fail, he would turn on by himself in the middle of the night. As I got older, more strange things started happening, especially when I was home alone. I would constantly catch glimpses of someone out of the corner of my eye, hear footsteps, or even the sound of running through the house. Mostly in the hallway right outside my door. Things would turn on and off by themselves, objects would move or fall off my desk, and sometimes, when I walked by my brother's room, I could see the shape of someone lying on his bed, only for it to disappear right before my eyes. One of the strangest things was hearing a woman's voice call my name. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Eventually, all of these things became part of my daily life. By this point, I had encountered 3 entities: a man, a woman, and a little boy who seemed to be around 6 years old. None of it bothered me anymore, and the more comfortable I became, the more they seemed to take a liking to me. The dark figure, in particular, became protective of me. When I was 12, my brother, who was 19 at the time, and I got into a big argument. I made him so angry that he almost hit me, something he had never done before. He raised his hand as if to swing, but he stopped himself and calmed down before walking away. That night, while he was at his own home, he woke up unable to breathe. When he opened his eyes, he saw the same dark figure on top of him, choking him. He tried to fight it off but couldn't. Then, all of a sudden, the figure disappeared. After that, my brother was never able to sleep in that house again. Every time he tried, the same dark figure would appear and choke him. A few months later, I became really sick with a high fever. In the middle of the night, I woke up coughing so hard that I struggled to breathe. As I sat up, I saw a woman standing at the foot of my bed, holding a shotgun and pointing it directly at me. At first, I thought I was hallucinating because of my fever, so I closed my eyes, hoping that she would be gone when I reopened them. But when I did, she was still there, still pointing the shotgun at me. I was choking, gasping for air, and she just stood there, watching. After a few seconds, she slowly started to disappear. As soon as she was gone, my cough stopped, and I could breathe again. I lay back down and went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I was no longer sick. It was as if she had taken all of the illness with her when she vanished. I never believed in ghosts. I used to think they were all just stories. But in 2007, during fall, everything changed for me. It was around my birthday in October, and we had just moved into what we thought was our dream house. The neighborhood was perfect, quiet, peaceful, no loud neighbors. We had moved to an area near downtown, a place filled with Native American history and stories of battles fought to defend their land. There's even a statue of Chief Solano, the one who claimed the land where the city stands today. The streets nearby witnessed a bloody war long ago. It didn't take long for us to settle in, about 2 weeks. Everything felt comfortable, like home, until things started changing. One day, as I was walking home from school, I saw 2 little kids, about 3 years old, visiting our next-door neighbors. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. The kids suddenly grabbed each other's hands and walked straight toward my house. I hurried to catch up with them, and when I arrived, I saw the look on their faces. They seemed frozen with fear. Pointing at our living room window, they cried, "Monster! There's a monster in there." A chill ran down my spine. At first, I thought they were just trying to scare me. Kids do that sometimes. But then, things got weirder. Halloween was just around the corner when my dad told me about something he had experienced. The night before our conversation, he woke up around 1 a.m. because the blankets were slipping off him and my mom. His bedroom faced my brother's room, and mine was a little further down the hall, always with the door shut at night. As my dad pulled the blankets up, he felt the urge to glance toward my brother's bedroom. That's when he saw it. A dark shadow of a little boy standing in their doorway. Thinking it was one of my brothers, aged 5 and 4 at the time, he looked closer. But something was off. The boy had long, flowing hair, and he was wearing a cloth around his waist, like how Indian boys used to dress. Then, in an instant, the boy ran down the hallway like a flash toward the living room and vanished. My dad stayed awake the rest of the night and told us everything in the morning. I was spooked, but since I hadn't seen it myself, I wasn't truly scared. That is, until the spirits started targeting me. Halloween night came, and after a fun day, I was exhausted. I went to bed, ready to sleep. Just as I started to drift off, I heard footsteps approaching my bed. My room had hard carpet, and I could clearly hear the sound of feet pressing into it. When I opened my eyes, the footsteps seemed to retreat quickly back to the door. My heart raced. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the doorway in negative effect. When I looked at the saved photo, there it was, a faint figure of a little boy standing in my doorway. I stayed up the rest of the night, unable to sleep. I didn't show the photo to anyone. I didn't want them to think I was crazy, trying to capture ghosts in pictures. Eventually, I deleted it because it just felt too strange having it on my phone. For a few weeks, the activity stopped, but then it returned. One night, as I walked through the house to get a glass of water, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Near the living room, there stood two figures. A tall Native American man and, next to him, the little boy my dad and I had both seen. I froze, staring at them. They stared back at me, and it felt so real. I finally mustered the courage to shout, "Hey!" But the moment I blinked, they were gone. Oddly enough, I didn't feel scared. Instead, there was a strange sense of peace. I told my family, and they were shocked, though we prayed over the house. Despite the prayers, I still saw the two spirits from time to time, usually around the kitchen or living room, always together. The last time I saw them, I greeted them, and they waved back before disappearing. Feeling connected to them, I decided to try communicating. I used my phone's voice recorder and asked if anyone was with me. When I played it back, I heard a deep voice saying, "My family," followed by the sound of a little boy weeping. It hit me hard. I tried another recording and heard the same voice again. "My family." The war, gone, followed by more weeping. I realized that the man had lost his family in the war, and the boy was likely his son. Determined to help them, I sat down in my room with candles and prayed. I asked the spirits to move on to the light, to find peace with God. Suddenly, the entire house felt lighter, brighter, like a heavy weight had been lifted. A year later, when we were moving out, my mom found an old photo in the shed. A Native American man with long black hair, a serious face, standing with his wife, daughter, and a little boy. I couldn't believe my eyes. Without explaining, I told my mom, "That's them." She was shocked, but when I told her I had helped them pass on, she was relieved. That experience changed the way I see spirits. Even though I still encounter paranormal activity from time to time, nothing will ever compare to the connection I felt with the little Indian boy and his father. I'm just glad they're at peace now. I've experienced ghost and demon encounters my entire life. As a child, they terrified me. I would cry, scream, and yell whenever I encountered one. Over time, as I got older, I convinced myself it was all just sleep paralysis. I even did a research paper on it while at City College, and that helped calm some of my fears. These encounters still happen pretty frequently, and while they frighten me sometimes, I've learned to laugh about them. I try to brush it off after I snap out of it, but today, something about my experience stuck with me. Maybe because it wasn't quite like the others. I was watching TV in bed earlier today, smoking a little marijuana. Before you jump to conclusions, I've had these encounters long before I ever touched any drugs. In fact, I started smoking as an adult to help with insomnia and anxiety, which got worse after these encounters started. Anyway, I started to drift off while watching TV. Suddenly, I woke up, but as usual, my body was paralyzed. I could see everything, my TV was still on, and my dog was lying next to the bed. That's when I noticed two ghosts or demons, whatever they were, approaching from my left. They took turns molesting me, touching and caressing me. I've gotten so used to this by now that I don't even fight it anymore. I'll admit, sometimes I even enjoy it. This time, I ended up having an intense orgasm. From what I remember, these entities seemed more human-like. Then, a third figure appeared, much larger and darker than the others. Felt stronger, more evil. Slowly, it began floating above me, pressing down on my body. I felt it start to penetrate me, and at first I didn't mind. But then fear took over, and I began trying to fight it off. My physical body was still paralyzed, but I could see my spirit arms trying to push the figure away. This part always scares me the most. When I see my spirit trying to separate from my body, I start to panic, afraid I won't be able to return to myself. At that moment, I caught sight of my dog freaking out too, which only made me more terrified. Without thinking, I screamed, "In the name of Jesus Christ, get the F*** off me." I'm not religious, but I was raised Christian, so I guess it was a natural reaction. Instantly, all the entities vanished. I stayed paralyzed for a little while longer before I was able to move again. As usual, I shrugged it off and went back to watching TV. But then things took a strange turn. A few minutes later, I started feeling nauseous. At first, I thought it was from something I ate earlier. But then the sharp pains hit me, right in my ovaries. The pain was so intense that I broke into a cold sweat and started shaking. It became hard to breathe, and I curled up in a ball, unable to move for about an hour. Every time I tried to straighten my body, the pain got worse. For a moment, I considered going to the ER, but I toughed it out, and eventually, the pain faded. Turns out it was just my time of the month, but this didn't feel like the usual cramps. It felt like sharp needles stabbing me repeatedly. Over the past 5 years, I've had this type of pain come and go, whether or not I'm on my period. I've had pap smears and ultrasounds recently, and everything's come back normal, so I've always just shrugged it off like everything else. But tonight, I started thinking. The molesting encounters with these entities started around the same time the pain in my ovaries began, about 5 years ago. Could it all be connected? It's not the first time I've noticed the pain after one of these encounters. I'm wondering if my body is trying to tell me something, or if these entities are somehow affecting me physically. My story begins on a night sometime in the 1980s. I wasn't home, but my uncle was, and he was alone when the phone rang. He heard footsteps, someone running out of my room to answer the phone. Moments later, I arrived to find all the closets, cabinets, and doors wide open, and my uncle's face pale with fear. He told me what had happened, how he had checked everything to see if anyone was in the house. There was no one, yet the phone still lay on the floor, off the hook. I picked it up and placed it back on the receiver. Moments later, the person who had called rang again, asking why someone had answered but said nothing. It was strange, but this was only the beginning of a lifetime of strange occurrences in that house. As I grew up, small things would happen, always in my room. I heard scratching sounds coming from the closet and pounding noises from the attic above my bed. It was unsettling, but never enough to make me leave. However, when I got married and moved out, it became clear that whatever was in that house had followed me. Now, in my new home, I still hear footsteps, running down the hallway, stopping at the side of my bed. Twice, it has pulled me off my bed, wrapping its hands around my neck, choking me, as if to keep me from screaming. One night, while I stayed up late watching a movie alone, I heard the distinct sound of someone getting up from a leather recliner, like the air returning to the cushion when weight lifts off. Then, I heard footsteps heading down the hallway toward my bedroom. My husband thinks I must have been dreaming, but I know I was wide awake. I've experienced this too many times to be confused. And it's not just me. My eldest son has experienced things as well, though I never told him about what I've been through, not wanting to scare him. My oldest son, now in college, spends a lot of time home alone during the day. He's told me about hearing footsteps running down the hallway, doors slamming open and shut while no one else is home. He's even taken to keeping his bedroom door closed. But whatever this presence is, it doesn't seem to care. It has opened his door and slammed it shut while he was inside. At night, he's experienced his loft bed shaking and pictures on his wall swaying. One time, while he had friends over, they heard things falling in the kitchen. When they went to check, they found empty water bottles on the floor. My son brushed it off, telling his friends it was probably the wind, but minutes later, they all heard something running in the kitchen. They were so scared they left the house, and my son stayed outside with the dog until I came home. Speaking of the dog, he's had his moments too. At night, he will sometimes stare down the long, dark hallway leading to my bedroom and start barking and growling, slowly backing up as if scared of something we can't see. We've looked down the hallway while he does this, but there's never anything there, at least not that we can see. The most terrifying experience I had happened just 3 weeks ago. I was asleep, my back turned to my husband, when I felt someone gently hugging me and wrapping their leg around mine. At first, I thought it was him, but then I heard a mischievous giggle, and the grip around me tightened. That's when I realized it wasn't him. I tried to move, but it had me in such a tight hold that I could barely breathe. I turned slightly and saw it, humanoid but with a much larger head, a long face, and a thin, bony body. One of my arms was free, so I tried to jab my finger into its eye, but the socket was empty. It only laughed louder. I couldn't scream or call out to my husband because the thing's grip was so tight around me. I'm not sure what happened next, but I believe I passed out from the lack of oxygen. When I woke up moments later, it was gone. I spent the rest of that week barely able to sleep, terrified it would return. I don't believe in ghosts, but this thing, whatever it is, feels evil. I've been living with this since I was 7 years old, and now, at 36, it still torments me. I don't understand why it messes with my son too. I've wondered if all this has something to do with my broken childhood. My father abandoned me when I was 6, shortly after my mother passed away. I was sexually molested not long after that. In my teen years, I was raped. I spent most of my childhood angry at God, struggling with suicidal thoughts through my early 20s. It was during this time that the hauntings seemed to start, and they haven't stopped since. I'm no longer angry with God. I love him with all my heart now, but it feels like this thing is trying to break me down, like it wants to drag me back to the weak, sad, and angry girl I used to be. It was a cool, sunny October morning as I pulled up in front of Chris's house. As I walked to his front door, memories of the year before flooded back, memories I had promised myself I wouldn't talk about again. In October 1987, my friends Chris, Michael, and I experienced something I hope I never go through again. It all started with a dare, the kind that only Chris could come up with. He was always experimenting with the spirit world. He even had an Ouija board. But this time, he discovered something different, something called waking the dead. According to Chris, all we had to do was go to a cemetery at midnight, stand on the grave of someone who had been dead for about a year, and call their name 10 times. If we did it right, the spirit would rise and speak to us. At first, I refused, and I should have stuck to that answer. But Chris was persistent, and with Michael involved, the peer pressure was too much. They teased me until I finally caved in. They chose Forest Lawn Cemetery in Cyprus as our spot. Earlier in the week, they had scoped it out and found 3 graves that fit the criteria and were close together. The plan was set for Friday night. We met at Michael's house since his parents were out of town for the weekend. We spent most of the evening doing nothing, just waiting. By 11:30, we headed out. A low fog had rolled in around 9 o'clock that night, adding to the eerie atmosphere, but we didn't let that stop us. It took only 10 minutes to get there. We parked across the street from the cemetery, but the fog was so thick we could barely see in front of us. We hopped the wall and made our way toward the graves. The fog seemed to creep along the ground like something out of a horror movie, and the only sound was the deafening chorus of thousands of crickets. It took us just 5 minutes to find the graves, giving us 5 minutes to spare. Chris told us to stand beside a grave and wait for his signal. With 1 minute left before midnight, he instructed us to step onto the graves and wait for his countdown. We were to say the name on the headstone 10 times and see what would happen. Chris counted down to 0 and we began. By the 8th time we said the name, something strange happened. Every cricket stopped chirping at once. We hesitated, unsure of what to do, but Chris urged us to finish, so we said the names twice more. After a few seconds of silence, nothing happened. I felt a wave of relief and stepped off the grave. That's when I heard Michael shout, "Get the hell out of here!" I couldn't see him through the fog, but I heard him start to run. Then I saw him pass in front of me. What terrified me, though, was what I saw, or rather didn't see, following him. About 15 feet behind him, something was parting the fog, but I couldn't make out what it was. I started running too, and as I did, I heard someone running behind me. Thinking it was Chris, I stopped and turned. That's when something knocked me down. As I scrambled to my feet, I saw the fog parting again, like someone was running through it, but there was no one there. It turned toward me, and I bolted, zigzagging my way back to the wall. I was out of breath by the time I got over, but I wasn't alone. Michael was there too, gasping as hard as I was. I asked if he was okay, and he told me why he had run. After he said the name for the last time, something started rising up through the fog, and he didn't feel safe staying there. I told him about what I saw behind him and about being knocked down. That's when we realized Chris wasn't with us. We waited for 5 minutes before deciding to go back and find him. We weren't sure if he was hurt or what, but we couldn't leave him there. As we walked back, calling his name, the fog began to thin, and that's when we saw him. Chris was sitting on the grave he had been standing on, but what horrified us was the figure standing beside him, its hand resting on his shoulder. We screamed his name and started running toward him, but before we could reach him, the figure vanished. When we got to Chris, he was sitting there, motionless, staring blankly ahead. Michael reached for him, and suddenly Chris stood up without a word. That's when we decided it was time to get out of there. We headed back to the car, and as we walked, the fog lifted, the lights seemed brighter, and that's when we noticed Chris's eyes. They were lifeless, staring ahead like a doll's eyes. We got into the car and drove back to Michael's house. 5 minutes into the drive, Chris broke his silence, screaming, "It wanted to take me! It wanted to take me!" Then, just as suddenly, he went quiet again. When we got to Michael's house, we tried to get Chris to talk, but he wouldn't say anything else. Exhausted, we crashed on the couches around 2:30 a.m. In the morning, I woke to the sound of Chris and Michael talking in the kitchen. When I saw Chris, I was shocked. He looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days, and some of his hair had turned white. We kept asking him what happened, but he didn't seem to remember anything from the night before. Michael and I decided not to bring it up again unless Chris did. A year passed, and Chris never spoke of that night. Whether he remembered or not, we'll never know. You see, the reason Michael and I were heading to Chris's house that day was because he had died. He was driving with his girlfriend when he lost control and crashed into a light pole. She survived, but Chris was killed instantly. The accident happened in front of the same cemetery we had visited exactly 1 year before. That's when Michael and I realized that whatever wanted to take him that night had finally claimed him. Here's a smooth and engaging rewrite of your story, keeping the mysterious and eerie tone. 20 years ago, I worked for a small agribusiness in Salinas, California. The greenhouses and office were the first buildings constructed on that land. Before then, it had been nothing but fields and ranches. Our location was close to Old Stage Road, which has long had a reputation for being haunted. One of the most infamous stories from the area is of the headless woman, said to have been murdered along the road. There have been countless reports of her walking along Old Stage, carrying her head in her arms. During the winter commute home, I would often see strange lights in the distance that looked like oncoming headlights, only to have them vanish as I drove towards them. At the office, the haunting began subtly. At first, we thought it was just one of the admin staff playing pranks. Office supplies would go missing, only to be found in odd places days later, sometimes right in the middle of the office floor. The TV in the conference room had a habit of switching on by itself at the strangest times. But as time went on, the activity became harder to dismiss. Members of the office staff and the work crew began catching glimpses of a woman with dark hair, dressed in a white shirt. She bore a striking resemblance to one of the managers, so much so that people often mistook the ghost for her, thinking she was sitting at her desk. I'd frequently hear my name called from the back of the office, only to find no one there when I went to check. Over time, most of us became used to La Fantasma, as we called her. Whenever we hired a new receptionist, the ghost would become especially active, as if she was upset by the change or curious about the new person. One time, our poor cleaning lady had an unsettling experience while working late in the lab. She was listening to the radio when, suddenly, the station changed, jumping from one end of the dial to the other, and the volume shot up to maximum. At the same moment, all the lights in the lab went out. Terrified, she refused to work the night shift after that. Aside from hearing my name and the occasional glimpse of her at a desk, there were 2 incidents that stand out in my memory. The first happened when I was working late to finish a programming project. I was the last one in the office that night, so I carefully locked up, turning off all the lights, locking the inner office doors, and finally securing the main door before heading out to my car. But just as I reached my car, I looked back and saw every single light in the office flicker back on. While I found it funny in a way, I didn't have the nerve to go back inside and turn them off. The second incident took place one morning when I went into the computer room and found the door blocked. There was only one door in and out of the room, and somehow the garbage can, full of heavy green bar computer paper, had been pushed up against the door from the inside. The door swung inward, so there was no logical way the can could have moved by itself. It was one of those playful, puzzling moments typical of La Fantasma. Despite her activity, she never seemed malicious, more mischievous than anything. But there was another presence on the property, one that felt much darker. Across from the main office, beyond the parking lot, was an open field. On several occasions, some of us saw a tall, shadowy man with a wide-brimmed hat pacing the field or standing at the edge of the parking lot, staring toward the building. Unlike the woman in the office, he never seemed as solid or substantial. Seeing him always sent chills down our spines, a sense of unease creeping over us every time he appeared. While the woman in white felt like a playful, ghostly companion in the office, the tall man in the field was a different story altogether. His presence was foreboding, and even though he never ventured near, the sight of him left us feeling unsettled. It was January 1980, and I was just 7 years old. That Sunday, my mother took me to church for the first time in my life. I didn't know much about God or the devil back then. We had never gone to church before, but I remember going with her a couple of times after that, just before she passed away from a brain aneurysm a few weeks later. After she died, I was sent to live with my grandmother. My father was only 28 at the time and told me he couldn't take care of me. I felt lost and heartbroken, having lost my mother and then my father soon after. My grandmother was Catholic, so she began taking me to her church. I still remember the strange feeling I had that day as we walked in. Felt like something was following me, and I was scared. I told my grandma that I wanted to go home, but she reassured me, saying everything would be fine because we were in the house of the Lord. We sat down next to a row of burning candles, but the unsettling feeling didn't go away. I kept glancing back at the entry of the church, and that's when I saw him. An older man whose eyes gave me chills. Something about them wasn't right. I told my grandma that the man scared me, but she didn't say anything. To my horror, the man came and sat behind me. I felt his gaze burning into me, but I was too afraid to turn around. As the priest began to speak and read from the Bible, one of the candles beside me suddenly burst. An usher quickly came over to clean up the mess, but moments later, I felt something thrashing around under my seat. At 7 years old, my feet didn't touch the ground, so I leaned forward to see what was happening beneath me. That's when I saw it. Those same terrifying eyes staring at me from under the pew. His eyes were yellowish red, filled with something dark and unnatural. Terrified, I stood up on the pew, ready to run, but my grandma held me down. The ushers came and carried the man out of the church, but the fear inside me wouldn't leave. When the service ended, I looked back toward the doorway, and there he was again, pacing back and forth. I told my grandma I never wanted to go back to that church. If we had to go to church, I wanted to go to the one my mom took me to. Thankfully, she agreed. Later that night, I was in my grandmother's room with her and 2 of my cousins. We were reminiscing, talking about all the good times we had with my mom. On the wall, my grandmother had a brand new statue of the Virgin Mary's head, a gift from a friend, given to her in memory of my mom. While we were talking, one of my cousins looked up at the statue and said, "Look, it's crying." To my horror, tears were streaming down its face. My grandmother saw it as a blessing, but to me it felt far more sinister. I got the same feeling I had back at the church, like whatever had followed us there had now come home with us. As I grew older, I began to feel like it was trying to possess me. One night, we attended an evening service at church, and during the sermon, I felt a tremendous pressure on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I knew I had to get out of there. I ran out of the church, but before I could leave, a woman stopped me and took me into another room. She called in a youth pastor and several others, and they began to pray over me. I felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. The pressure was unbearable, and I was filled with anger and heat, so much heat that I could feel it radiating off my body. They must have prayed over me all night because by the time they were finished, the sun was rising. But something had changed. I felt calm, a sense of peace and love washing over me like I had never felt before. Over the years, the presence would return, but it never tried to enter me again. Instead, it seemed to lurk, trying to scare and confuse me. And now I feel like it's after my son. I have a succubus. In public, I'm allowed to refer to her as Pure, though she's given me other names to use in private. She's very real, a constant presence in my life, and I consider it a privilege to have her with me wherever I go. Our story began in 1982, when I first felt her contact. One night, I woke up feeling breathless with intense desire, a feeling I now recognize as Pure's influence. At the time, I didn't understand what was happening. Instead of acknowledging that someone or something might be there, I simply took care of myself. After that initial experience, I didn't have further contact for many years, but paranormal activity followed me. I would hear strange noises, like a door opening and closing, accompanied by a loud hum, and on one occasion, visitors at my home heard a female voice whispering something outside my window. In 1995, the activity intensified. Pure appeared to me in a dream, a solid black woman straddling me. I frequently felt her presence, often sensing her in my peripheral vision. Around that time, I began to feel her touch, a sensation that was unmistakably feminine and, frankly, indescribable in its intensity. During a period of isolation, I became more aware that something or someone was touching me, bringing that same overwhelming arousal I'd felt that first night. The more I cultivated this connection, the more vivid and tangible her presence became. Each touch, each encounter grew stronger over time. I tried communicating with her, both verbally and mentally. About 3 years ago, I spoke aloud, "I wish I could hear you." To my surprise, I heard a voice in my mind that said, "Listen harder." Since then, I've grown attuned to her voice, and now we can communicate almost as easily as I can speak to another person. A few things to note. Since I embraced this connection with Pure, the paranormal disturbances that had plagued me for years have stopped. And for what it's worth, my cats no longer seem disturbed by her presence. They leave the room when I go to bed with her, but they no longer hiss or act out, as one might expect if they were sensing something malevolent. Mr. Graham owned a tiny corner market, and he absolutely loved the children who frequented his store. His smile was genuine, and his heart was pure gold. Even though his business barely made a profit, he handed out free candy to the kids. Naturally, this made the children flock to his store before and after school, eager for a treat and to hear his stories. Mr. Graham had a special gift for storytelling. Every afternoon, he would gather us around and spin new tales, each more captivating than the last. His voice had a way of pulling you in, and when he spoke, you could hear a pin drop. Nobody wanted to miss a single word. Even customers who came in would pause to listen, their eyes lighting up with childlike wonder. He had a way of making his characters come alive with distinct voices and personalities. It was as if the stories were happening right in front of us. I don't know how he found the time to create a new story every day, but somehow he did. Each one transported us to faraway places full of wonder, joy, and adventure. Mr. Graham always smiled, but I sometimes felt bad for him. His clothes were worn, and the knees of his pants were threadbare. Yet he took pride in his appearance. His shirts were always clean and ironed with perfect creases, and his shoes, though old, were polished to a shine. He didn't have much, but he was rich in spirit. He found joy in giving, in telling stories, and in being with us kids. I think we were the closest thing he had to a family since his wife had passed away years earlier. One day, everything changed. After school, my friends and I rushed to his store like always, but it was closed. No sign, no explanation, just locked doors. It was so unlike Mr. Graham, who never missed a day. We waited, confused and worried, hoping he would show up, but he didn't. That evening, my mother sat me down and broke the news. Mr. Graham had passed away from a heart attack. Couldn't believe it. This kind, gentle soul was gone just like that. No more stories, no more laughter. I cried, heartbroken that I never got to say goodbye. As time passed, the store never reopened. The neighborhood changed, and a big mall took over the area. Mr. Graham's corner shop became outdated and forgotten, boarded up and left to decay. I hadn't walked past it in years. One evening, nostalgia got the better of me, and I decided to visit the old place. The sun had just set, and though the neighborhood had become run down, I wasn't afraid. This was my home, and I wanted to see Mr. Graham's store one last time. As I approached, the sight of the building filled me with bittersweet memories. Gumballs, red hots, and the sound of Mr. Graham's voice telling his magical tales. Just as I was about to turn away, I noticed a faint glow coming from inside the store. It looked like candlelight, flickering behind the boarded-up windows. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tiptoed over to peek through the cracks. What I saw left me stunned. Mr. Graham was inside, sweeping the dusty floor of his long-abandoned store. He was a ghost, but he looked so real, so familiar, like he was just going about his day as usual. I watched in disbelief, my heart racing. Suddenly, Mr. Graham looked up and smiled in my direction. Startled, I froze, my hands pressed against the boards. He tilted his head and winked at me, just like he used to when he was alive. In that moment, I knew he was okay. More than okay. The twinkle in his eyes was still there. Without a word, he turned back to his work and slowly faded away. The store returned to its dark, empty state, but I walked away with a light heart and a smile on my face. Mr. Graham, you will never be forgotten. I'd like to share my experiences from the night my family and I stayed on the Queen Mary. It was May 9th, 2009, and we stayed in room A107. I was particularly excited about the stay because I had heard so many ghost stories about the ship. Unfortunately, we couldn't take any of the ghost tours offered because we had our 19-month-old son with us. But I was determined to make it to the first-class swimming pool, a known hotspot for paranormal activity. We arrived around 2:30 p.m. and checked into our room. As we unlocked the door, I noticed a small, yellow flower, fake, but still, on the floor right outside our door. I picked it up, and as soon as I walked into the room, I was hit with a wave of nausea, like motion sickness. I even asked my husband if the boat was moving. He thought I was joking, but I wasn't. I really felt sick all of a sudden, but I brushed it off. We spent some time looking around the room, fiddling with the light switches, bathroom fixtures, and whatever else was there to explore. I left the little yellow flower on the vanity and didn't think much of it. Afterward, we walked around the ship to pass the time before my in-laws arrived. As we explored, we made our way to the promenade deck, and as we climbed the steps, I caught the distinct smell of cigar or pipe smoke. I immediately thought, no one's supposed to be smoking in here. But when I asked my husband if he smelled anything, he only mentioned food. There was a lounge nearby. Just as quickly as the smell appeared, it vanished. When my in-laws arrived, they were staying in room A113, not far from us. As they unlocked their door, I noticed another yellow flower, just like the one I found at our door. I pointed it out to my husband, but he brushed it off, saying our son must have carried it over. I went back to our room to grab my cell phone, and sure enough, the original yellow flower was still on the vanity where I had left it earlier. I couldn't shake the odd feeling of seeing the same flower at both rooms. Later that evening, my in-laws kindly offered to watch our son so my husband and I could take a tour. The only one available that night was the Twilight Historical Tour, and I was thrilled because it included a stop at the first-class swimming pool. Armed with cameras, I signed us up immediately. The tour itself was fascinating. We learned so much about the ship's history, and as we walked, I realized that some of the things I'd experienced earlier might have connections to the ship's past. For instance, when we reached the promenade deck, our guide explained that the shop now called Pacific Times used to be a cigar and smoke shop in the 1930s, exactly where I had smelled the cigar smoke earlier. Curious, I poked my head into the tiny store after the guide moved on, but it smelled like nothing but magazines and newspapers. As we continued the tour, we visited the wheelhouse, and while poking around, I saw a man in what appeared to be a naval uniform walk by a doorway in front of me. His deep gray uniform caught my attention, but when I walked over to see where he went, no one was there. I later learned that during the war, when the Queen Mary was dubbed the Gray Ghost, everything on the ship, including the uniforms, was painted gray to avoid detection by the enemy. That connection gave me chills. Finally, we made it to the first-class swimming pool. While taking pictures, I kept seeing something out of the corner of my eye, and even our guide mentioned seeing something too. Other people in the group also felt like they saw movement around the pool area. I lingered behind to snap more photos and noticed something strange. I swore I saw water in the pool. There hadn't been any water earlier, but it looked like there was a shimmering reflection in the deeper end. I grabbed my husband and pointed it out, but when he looked, the water was gone. I asked the guide afterward if they ever filled the pool anymore, and he confirmed that the pool had been out of use for years. None of the pipes worked, so it couldn't have been filled. As the tour continued, the guide showed us the deadly staircase, where two people, including a little girl named Jackie, had died. Jackie was believed to haunt the pool area. Hearing about how the boat was top-heavy and rocked constantly during its voyages explained the extreme motion sickness I'd felt earlier that day. When we returned to our room, I noticed how noisy the boat was. You could hear all sorts of sounds through the thin walls. My husband and I kept the windows closed since they were heavy and difficult to open, making a loud noise when moved. We also kept the bathroom door shut because the fan inside wouldn't turn off. Around 10 p.m., I was exhausted. Unusually so, considering I'm usually a night owl. I'm also a light sleeper, so any small sound typically wakes me up. At 12:14 a.m., I woke up to the sound of heavy, raspy breathing. I initially thought it might be coming from the next room, but then I realized it was in our room. I lay still, listening, thinking it might be my husband. But as I turned to check on him, I froze. There, standing to the right of the vanity, was a man. As soon as I saw him, he seemed to melt into the shadow cast on the wall. He was dark, like a shadow himself, and it looked like he was wearing a hat. I also caught the faint smell of cigar smoke again. Oddly, I didn't feel panicked. I got up, checked on my son, and went back to bed. I fell asleep quickly, feeling drowsy. Around 2 a.m., I woke up again, this time to the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was someone walking in the hall, but then I realized the footsteps were coming around the bed to my side. They stopped right in front of me, and I smelled the cigar smoke again before it disappeared. Again, I wasn't scared, just overwhelmingly tired, so I fell back asleep. The last incident happened at 3:16 a.m. I woke up to the sound of the door handle being jiggled, followed by faint voices. I assumed it was drunken guests trying to get into the wrong room, but the noise didn't stop. As I reached to turn on the light to tell them they had the wrong room, I saw the handle on the bathroom door moving, like someone was trying to open it. The second I got up, it stopped. I checked the bathroom, but everything was quiet except for the fan. The next morning, I woke up to find the window wide open. Neither my husband nor I had opened it during the night, and given how heavy and noisy those windows were, I would have heard it. We packed up to leave, and as we walked through the ship, I couldn't help but feel a little sad to go. This had been an incredible experience, and I felt fortunate to have witnessed something. One last eerie moment occurred that morning when we stopped by the Starboard Bakery on the promenade deck for breakfast. The room used to be the children's playroom, and while we were there, my son kept laughing and clapping at seemingly nothing. He would walk over to an empty spot, stop, and start babbling, as if he were talking or playing with someone invisible. At one point, he held up his wind-up monkey, showing it off to no one in particular. There was no one else there. As for the shadow man I saw, I plan to do some research on the passengers who stayed on the ship to see if I can learn anything. If I find something, I'll be sure to update this story.